She had everything: a billion-dollar empire, a penthouse above the clouds, and a man who had just told both their families he wasn't sure he wanted her anymore. At midnight, Vivian Sterling didn't go back upstairs to her own floor. She went down 2 flights and knocked on a stranger's door. What happened in the next 8 hours would cost her an engagement, a reputation, and every careful wall she'd spent a decade building, and she would do it all over again without hesitation. If you've ever stayed too long in something that stopped choosing you back, this story is for you. Hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and let's find out together how far this story travels. The building had a name that sounded more expensive than it was: the Caldwell Residences, a mid-rise on the west edge of the Midtown corridor where the good neighborhoods started bleeding into the ordinary ones. It had a doorman who fell asleep by 10 and an elevator that groaned between floors like it had opinions about the people riding it. The lobby had marble floors that someone had clearly been proud of once, 20 years ago, before the grout turned gray and the overhead lights began flickering in cold weather. Floor 14 was where Landon Hayes lived. Floor 16 was where Vivian Sterling owned the penthouse. In 18 months of sharing the same building, they had spoken exactly 3 times. Once, when she'd accidentally received a package of his in her mail slot. Once when they'd been stuck in the elevator together for 11 minutes during a power flicker and had talked about nothing: the weather, the building's maintenance response time, whether the new Thai place on the corner was actually good or just had good Yelp reviews. The 3rd time had been a nod in the parking garage. Not even a word. Just a nod. He knew who she was, vaguely. He'd seen her name on a Forbes list someone had shared in a work chat as a joke, people who are definitely having a better Monday than you, and he'd recognized her photo. She'd built her company, Sterling Meridian, from a consulting firm she'd started at 23 into something that now had offices in 6 cities and a client roster that included 3 major hospital networks and a pharmaceutical distribution company he'd personally edited product launch audio for. He remembered thinking, and then closing the tab and going back to the audio timeline he was working on. She was, in the most uncomplicated terms, out of his world. Not in a way that bothered him, just in a way that was true. Which made what happened at 12:19 on a Thursday night in early November something Landon would spend the next several weeks trying to explain to himself, and failing. He heard the knock from the kitchen, where he was standing in his socks eating leftover pasta cold because he'd forgotten to reheat it, and didn't feel like waiting. His daughter, Maya, had been asleep since 9. She was 6, and 6-year-olds required a sleep schedule that functioned like a military operation. He'd read her 2 chapters of a book about a girl who could talk to horses, sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing went slow and even, and then gone back to the audio project he'd been putting off for 3 days. He hadn't finished it. He'd ended up eating cold pasta instead, which was a pretty accurate summary of how his evenings usually went. The knock was quiet. Not the panicked hammering of someone with an emergency, not the impatient rhythm of a delivery driver who'd punched in the wrong floor. Just 3 soft knocks, deliberate, like whoever was on the other side had considered them carefully. He set the fork down on the counter. The hallway to the front door was short. 8 steps, maybe 10. He went through it and looked through the peephole, and then stood there for a moment without opening the door, because he was reasonably certain he was either exhausted enough to be hallucinating or something had gone significantly sideways in the building tonight. Vivian Sterling was standing in his hallway. She was wearing an evening gown, deep blue, structured at the shoulders, the kind of dress that looked like it had been made for exactly one specific occasion and nothing else. Her hair was still done. Whatever elaborate arrangement it had been that evening was mostly intact, with a few pieces pulled loose, like someone who'd been running their hands through it and then stopped themselves. Her earrings caught the hallway light. Her shoes, which were not built for standing on a linoleum hallway floor at midnight, were still on her feet. She looked, from the outside, almost composed. He opened the door. She looked at him for a second without saying anything. He looked back. The silence had a quality to it. Not uncomfortable exactly, but loaded in a way he couldn't immediately name. Then she said, very quietly, "Stay with me tonight." And Landon Hayes, who had not once in 18 months of cohabiting this building, had a conversation with this woman that lasted longer than 4 minutes, opened the door wider and said, "Yeah, okay, come in." He didn't know why he said it. He'd think about that later, too. Dad. He'd already worked out that something was badly wrong before she told him anything, because of the shoes. She sat down on his couch and took them off. Just reached down and unclipped them, one, then the other, and set them on the floor with the careful precision of someone who was using that small act to hold themselves together. He brought her a glass of water without asking if she wanted one, because it seemed like the right thing to do, and she accepted it with both hands and sat there holding it without drinking. He sat in the armchair across from her, not close enough to crowd her, not far enough to feel like he was giving her space out of discomfort. "I'm not going to ask you a lot of questions," he said, "but if there's someone who needs to know where you are, you should probably send a text." She looked at him. Something moved across her face, not amusement exactly, but something adjacent to it. "That's a very practical thing to say." "It's midnight and you're dressed like that," he said. "I'm just covering the basics." She looked down at the dress. "I was at an engagement party." A pause. "My engagement party." He processed that. "Was," he said, not a question. "Is, technically," she said. "Nothing's been formally called off. We're just—" She stopped, pressed her mouth together. "My fiancé told his parents and my parents at the same dinner table that he wasn't sure he wanted to get married anymore. To me. He said it like he was sharing a business concern, like he needed everyone's input." She set the glass down on the coffee table, and Landon noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Then he looked at me like he expected me to help manage the conversation. "Did you?" Landon asked. "I excused myself," she said. "I went to the bathroom. I stood in there for about 6 minutes, and then, instead of going back to the table, I got in the elevator." She looked around the apartment, the small kitchen visible through the pass-through, the overflowing bookshelf against the wall, a child's drawing taped to the refrigerator, the audio equipment on the desk in the corner. "I don't actually know why I got off on this floor." 14's a good floor," Landon said. She almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. "I couldn't go back upstairs," she said. "He'd be there eventually, or he'd call up a dozen times before he got there, and I just needed somewhere that wasn't—" She stopped again. She had a pattern, he was starting to notice, of stopping herself mid-sentence when what she was about to say was too honest, like she'd trained herself to pull back just before the real thing came out. "I'm sorry, this is incredibly strange. You don't know me." "I know you from the elevator," Landon said. "You know my name. I know you think the Thai place is probably just good at marketing, which I also think." She looked at him. Then she exhaled, long and slow, and something in her shoulders dropped about 2 inches. "I'm sorry," she said again, "for knocking on your door." "You don't have to keep apologizing," he said. "I opened it." He made tea because he didn't have anything better to offer, and the situation seemed like it called for something warm. He found a box of chamomile in the back of a cabinet that Maya had asked for once, and then decided she hated, and he made 2 mugs of it, and he brought them out, and they sat there in the low light of the living room with the city going quiet outside the windows, and Vivian Sterling told him things she probably shouldn't have been telling a near stranger at 1 in the morning. But Landon didn't push. He didn't ask follow-up questions in a way that felt like he was digging. He mostly listened, and when he said something, it was usually short, and it didn't have an agenda behind it, which was, she would tell him much later, the thing that made her keep talking. His name was Damian Cross. She'd met him 4 years ago at an industry conference. He ran the commercial real estate division of his family's investment group, and he was the kind of man who entered a room like he'd already assessed it and decided he was the most important person in it. She'd found that confidence attractive, initially. A lot of people had. "He's not a bad person," Vivian said, turning the mug in her hands. "I want to be clear about that. He's not cruel. He's never been cruel." "Okay," Landon said. She stopped. Started again. "He forgets things. Not small things. He forgets things that matter. My mother's surgery last spring, I told him the date 3 times. He didn't call. I didn't say anything because he'd been busy with a deal, and I thought it was a one-time thing." She paused. "It wasn't a one-time thing." "How long have you been making excuses for that?" "Longer than I should have." Yeah, Landon said. No judgment in it, just agreement. And every time I tried to bring it up, it became about his feelings, she said. And there was something hard in her voice now, something that had been building under the surface of the evening. He'd get quiet, or he'd say I was reading into things, or he'd make it about how I don't communicate the way he needs me to. And I would end up apologizing for asking to be considered. She heard herself say it out loud, and something shifted in her expression, like she was hearing it for the first time, even though she was the one who'd lived it. I apologized for asking to be considered. Landon didn't say anything. He just let that sit. It sat there between them for a moment, like an object they could both see clearly. He flooded my phone on the way down here, she said. 17 messages in 12 minutes. I'm sure they're all very reasonable. He'll have framed it as a misunderstanding. He's good at that. At making things seem reasonable after they've already happened.
Are you going to read them?
Not tonight, she said. And then with something that sounded almost like surprise. That's the first time I've said that. Landon's apartment was not impressive. He'd lived there 3 years and he hadn't done a lot to make it look like a conscious interior design choice. It was clean, reasonably organized, full of the evidence of a person who lived practically and didn't have a lot of time to think about aesthetics. There were noise-canceling headphones on the desk, a laundry basket that was probably supposed to be in the bedroom. Maya's things were everywhere in the soft, pleasant way that children's belongings tend to scatter. A stuffed rabbit on the windowsill, a stack of library books by the couch, a pair of very small sneakers by the door with the Velcro straps hanging loose. Vivian looked at the sneakers. How old? She asked. 6, Landon said. Just turned 6 in September. What's her name? Maya. Vivian nodded. She looked around the room again, and this time there was something different in it. Not the assessment of someone cataloging what was missing, but something quieter. You're doing it alone? She asked. Yeah, he said. Not volunteering anything else, which she respected. Does she know how much you've rearranged for her? Landon was quiet for a second. I hope not, he said. That'd make it weird. Her phone went off again at 1:40. Not a message, a call. Damien's name lit up the screen, visible from where Landon was sitting. Vivian looked at it. The call rang out. He's going to come here, she said. Eventually. Here, Landon said. Yes, he'll check the building. He knows where I live. She pressed her lips together. He'll figure out I didn't go back upstairs. That's fine, Landon said. He can knock on the door like everyone else. You don't have to. I'm not doing anything, Landon said. It's my apartment. If someone comes to my door, I'll decide what to do about it. He shrugged. Go ahead and stress about it if you want to, but you don't have to. Vivian looked at him across the coffee table. You're a very uncomplicated person, she said. Not an insult, almost like relief. I prefer practical, he said. Most people with money find that irritating, she said. Practicality. They want everything to have weight and complexity and symbolism. You say that like you're not one of them. She smiled, small and real, the first fully real thing that had appeared on her face since she'd walked in. I'm not sure what I am anymore, she said. Tonight, I'm someone who doesn't have a good answer for why she's sitting in her neighbor's apartment drinking terrible chamomile tea. For the record, Landon said, the tea is fine. The tea is not fine. The tea is what I had. Which is fine, she said. That's what I mean. This is fine. She looked around again, and there was something in her voice that he wouldn't quite place until later. Something like the recognition of a thing you've been hungry for, but couldn't name until you were finally eating. It's genuinely fine in here. He showed her where the bathroom was at around 2. She went in, and he heard water running for a while, and when she came back, her eye makeup had been washed off, and her hair was down, and she looked different. Not worse, just less constructed. She'd folded the expensive dress over her arm and was wearing one of the guest towels as a wrap, which was a practical problem he hadn't anticipated. He stopped, recalibrated. I can find you something to sleep in if you want. I can take the couch. Maya's going to be up by 6:30, so this isn't exactly. I don't need the bed, Vivian said. The couch is fine, honestly. She paused. I haven't slept on a couch in about 8 years. Well, he said, welcome back. He found her a pair of sweatpants that were close enough in size and a clean t-shirt that had a name of a sound engineering conference on it, and she accepted them without comment. He got a blanket from the hallway closet, the good one, the one he used himself, not the scratchy decorative one, and she sat on the couch and pulled it over her lap. "I'll be in the other room," he said. "You don't have to do anything." "Landon," she said. He paused. "Thank you," she said. Genuinely. He looked at her for a second, then, "Yeah." He went to bed. He lay in the dark for a while, staring at the ceiling, thinking about nothing and everything, and the strange gravity of the evening, and then he fell asleep because he was exhausted, and that was what bodies did. At 3:20, his phone buzzed. A building intercom notification. Someone at the lobby entrance was requesting access. The doorman, who sometimes actually stayed awake if things were busy, had flagged it. Guest requesting access to floor 14. Name provided, Damian Cross. Reason? Looking for a resident on floor 16. Landon read it twice. Then he texted back, "Don't let him up. Tell him the resident isn't available." He put his phone face down and went back to sleep. Maya found Vivian at 6:22. Landon heard it before he saw it. The particular small footstep pattern of a 6-year-old who had already decided that whatever was happening, she was going to investigate it thoroughly. He got up, pulled on a shirt, and came out to find Maya standing at the edge of the living room in her pajamas, holding her stuffed rabbit by one ear, staring at the person asleep on the couch. Vivian was awake, already sitting up, looking at Maya with the careful stillness of someone who was very uncertain of the protocols. "Hi," Maya said. "Hi," Vivian said. "Are you a friend of my dad's?" Vivian glanced at Landon, who had appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame. He was curious what she would say. "I'm a neighbor," Vivian said. "From upstairs." Maya considered this. "Do you want breakfast?" she said. "My dad makes good eggs." "Maya," Landon said. "She's a guest," Maya said, with the full authority of a 6-year-old who understood hospitality. "Guests get offered things." Vivian looked at the child for a moment, and something moved across her face that had nothing to do with wealth or engagements or any of what had happened the night before. Something simpler and more vulnerable than all of it. "I'd love some eggs," she said. Breakfast was scrambled eggs, slightly oversalted because Landon miscalculated while half asleep, and the last of a loaf of bread toasted to the point of crunchiness, because the toaster ran hot and he never remembered to adjust it. Maya narrated the entire meal with extensive detail about a dream she'd had involving a talking fox who wanted to be a librarian, and Vivian listened to every word with the kind of attention that couldn't be faked. She asked 2 or 3 questions, real questions, not the distracted adult filler questions, and Maya lit up like a lamp. Landon watched this from behind his coffee mug and said nothing. At some point, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at it. Damian Cross, 6:47 a.m. "Vivian, I know you need space, but I think we need to talk today. I spoke with your mother last night. She's worried. We all are. Please call me when you're ready." He set the phone back down. He wasn't going to show her that unless she asked. She'd find it eventually. When Maya went to get dressed for school, the apartment went quiet in the way it only did when a child had just left a room. Vivian sat at the kitchen table with her second cup of coffee and looked out the window. The city had the low gray quality of a November morning that hadn't decided whether to commit to rain yet. "I need to go upstairs at some point," she said, not asking permission, just saying it. "Whenever you're ready," Landon said. "I need to call my assistant and cancel 3 meetings." She paused. "And I need to call my mother, who I guarantee has already called me 9 times. She looked at her phone, still face down on the table where she'd put it the night before. She hadn't looked at it yet. "He called my mother," she said, and there was something new in her voice now, a flatness. "Of course he did. That's how it works. He creates the situation and then manages everyone else's response to it, so that by the time I'm talking to anyone, they've already been given his version." "Does your mother like him?" Landon asked. "She likes what he represents," Vivian said. "Stability, family, a certain kind of social legibility that she thinks I need because I'm 30 and unmarried, and she doesn't quite understand what I've built, but she understands that it would look better with a husband next to it. She said it without bitterness, just a measured tiredness. She means well. She's operating with different data. Landon nodded. Yeah. You're not going to tell me to go back to him, Vivian said. No, he said. Most people would. Most people would say I'm overreacting, that he was just having a moment, that it's cold feet, that he loves me. Maybe he does, Landon said. Doesn't mean the rest of it isn't true. She looked at him. A person can love you and still not be paying attention, he said. He said it like a fact, neutral, the way you'd state a thing you'd figured out the long way. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Vivian was quiet for a moment. You sound like you're talking from experience. He looked at her, and something passed across his face. Not avoidance, but the kind of pause that tells you someone is deciding how honest to be. Little bit, he said. She didn't push. She returned the same courtesy he'd given her the night before. Maya came back in wearing her school clothes, jeans and a yellow shirt with a pineapple on it and one sock on the wrong foot, and Landon corrected the sock while she complained about it, and then she went to get her backpack, and Vivian watched the whole exchange from the kitchen table with the expression of someone watching a thing that was working exactly the way things were supposed to work. Do I smell like someone else's apartment? Maya asked him from the doorway. You smell like you, Landon said. Good, she said, satisfied. She turned to Vivian. Bye, she said. You can come back. Maya, Landon said. I'm just saying she can, Maya said. It's okay with me. And then she was gone, backpack bouncing, small sneakers squeaking on the floor. Landon walked her downstairs. He was gone about 15 minutes. When he came back, Vivian was standing by the window with her phone in her hand. She'd finally looked at it. He could tell by the set of her shoulders. 22 messages, she said. 9 from Damien, 4 from my mother, 3 from his mother, 2 from our mutual friends who I'm sure have already picked a side. She lowered the phone. He told my mother I was emotionally overwhelmed and needed support. He said it like he was concerned, like he's the one managing the crisis. What do you want to do? Landon asked. I want to not have to manage this, she said. I want to be the person who's allowed to be. She stopped, breathed. I want to be angry without someone turning it into a conversation about my communication style. You can be angry, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright with something that wasn't quite tears but was close to them, held back by sheer force of habit, probably. You barely know me, she said. I know enough, he said. And you know where the door is if you decide you've had enough of this apartment. She didn't move toward the door. She turned back to the window, and after a minute she picked up her phone and began drafting a text to her assistant. Landon went back to his desk and put his headphones on and pulled up the audio project he'd been avoiding for 3 days, and they stayed like that for a while. 2 people in the same room, doing their own things, in a silence that had stopped feeling strange and started feeling, improbably, like something almost comfortable. Outside, the November sky finally made up its mind, and rain began to fall. She left at 10:30. She took her shoes in one hand and her folded dress in the other, and she stood at his front door looking like she wanted to say something that she hadn't assembled the right words for yet. The conference shirt, Landon said. You can keep it. I'll return it, she said. It's an 11-year-old conference shirt, he said. Keep it. She looked at him. Then she said, I don't know what happens next. Yeah, he said. Most people don't. With the engagement, with Damien, with... She gestured vaguely at the apartment, which he took to mean the whole of last night and this morning and whatever it was that had accumulated between 2 people who barely knew each other but had somehow ended up in the same small space for 12 hours and come out of it. Okay. You don't have to know right now, he said. She nodded. She put her hand on the door handle. Landon, she said. Yeah. Thank you for opening the door. He looked at her for a second. She looked back. Door's always been there, he said. You just had to knock. She left. He closed the door. He stood in the quiet of the apartment for a moment. The rain outside, the faint smell of coffee, the small sneakers still by the door because Maya had gone to school in different ones. Then he went back to his desk, put his headphones on, and got back to work. The audio project wasn't going to edit itself. She returned the conference shirt 3 days later, not by leaving it at his door or dropping it with the building's front desk, which would have been the easier options and the ones that involved the least amount of explaining. She knocked. He answered. She held out the shirt, which had been washed and folded into a square so precise it looked like it had been done by someone who'd never had to rush a load of laundry in their life. "You washed it," he said. "Of course I washed it." "I told you to keep it." "I know," she said. "I washed it and brought it back anyway." He took it. He looked at her. She was dressed differently today. Not the billionaire's armor of a tailored blazer and heels, but dark jeans and a simple gray sweater, her hair pulled back loosely, a coffee cup in her other hand that she'd clearly already been working on for a while. She looked like a person running an errand, not a woman who ran a company with offices in 6 cities. "You want to come in?" he said. "I have a call in 40 minutes, she said. "So that's a yes," he said, and stepped back from the door. She came in. That was how it started, the second time and all the times after it. She always had somewhere to be, always had a reason that she offered up front like a kind of disclaimer, and she always came in anyway. He stopped remarking on it after the 3rd visit. She stopped pretending the disclaimer meant anything after the 4th. What she didn't tell him, not yet, not all of it, was what the 3 days between the first visit and this one had actually looked like. She'd gone upstairs that first morning and found Damien in her apartment. He'd gotten the spare key from the building's front desk by claiming she'd asked him to check on things. She'd stood in the doorway in Landon's conference shirt and her evening gown folded over her arm, and he'd looked at her from the kitchen where he was making himself coffee like he lived there, and the first thing he'd said was, "I was worried about you. Not I'm sorry. Not I know what I did." Just the immediate pivot to his own concern, positioned so that whatever had happened became the thing they were recovering from together. "I'm fine," she'd said. "Where were you?" "Downstairs." He'd paused. "The neighbor?" And the way he said it, not quite an accusation, but not quite not one, told her everything about which direction the next conversation was heading. "His name is Landon," she said. "He let me sleep on his couch." "Vivian, I didn't want to be here," she said. "I wasn't ready to be here. I needed somewhere that wasn't this. And a stranger's apartment was better than—" "Yes," she said, flat, clear, no follow-up. It was. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours and covered everything except the actual problem. Damien was articulate, she'd give him that. He was good at building a case, at reframing a thing until it wore the face of something more reasonable, at speaking in the calm, measured tone of someone who'd already decided he was the adult in the room. He said he'd been under pressure. He said the engagement had felt like it was moving faster than he'd realized. He said he loved her. He said that 3 times, in different ways, like repetition was the same as evidence. He did not say, "I should have called when your mother was in surgery. I should have paid attention. I should have treated your feelings like they had the same weight as mine." He didn't say any of that. She noticed. When he finally left, she sat down on the couch in her evening dress and her neighbor's shirt, and she did something she hadn't done in probably 4 years. She made a list. Not a business list, not a task breakdown, not a strategic roadmap. Just a plain, handwritten list on a notepad from her kitchen drawer. On one side, she wrote what she had. On the other, she wrote what she was pretending not to see. The second column was longer. She hadn't shown the list to anyone, but she'd thought about it every day since. That was the version of the last 3 days she was sitting with when she came back to Landon's apartment and handed him the shirt and said yes to the coffee. She didn't tell him all of that right away. She told him pieces of it, over the next hour, in the non-linear way people tell the truth about things they've been turning over for a while. He sat at the kitchen table across from her and didn't interrupt. And when she got to the part about the 2-hour conversation with Damien, he leaned back in his chair and said, "He made coffee." "What?" "In your apartment, with your coffee. He made himself comfortable while you were figuring out if you were okay." He said it without heat, just putting it on the table. That's a specific kind of move. Vivian sat with that. "He said he was there because he was worried." "Sure," Landon said. "You don't believe that?" "I think he was probably both things at once," Landon said, worried and making sure he was in the apartment when you got back. Those aren't mutually exclusive either. She looked at him. You do that a lot. What? Hold two things at the same time without picking one. It's usually more accurate, he said. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. He asked me about you, she said. He wanted to know if something had happened. What did you tell him? The truth, she said, that you made terrible tea and let me sleep on the couch. The corner of Landon's mouth moved. My tea is fine. Your tea is absolutely not fine, she said. But that's not the point. She exhaled. He didn't like it, that I'd gone to someone else. Not because he thought anything inappropriate happened, because it looked a certain way. Because people in our social circle would talk, and the story of where I was on the night of the engagement dinner was now a story he didn't control. Is that what he said? He said he was concerned about how it would look, she said. For both of them. For both of you, Landon said. Or for his version of both of you. She didn't answer that immediately. She looked at the table, and then out the window, and then back at her coffee. That's a very precise question, she said. It's not that precise, he said. It's just a question. It feels precise when the answer is something you've been avoiding, she said. He nodded once and didn't push. Outside, the city was doing what it did on November mornings, moving fast and loud and completely indifferent to the small domestic dramas unfolding in the apartments above it. A siren went by. A truck downshifted on the block below. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds, the kind that reminded you the world wasn't organized around any particular person's crisis. I canceled the venue, Vivian said. Landon looked up. Not the wedding, she said quickly. The venue. There was a tasting scheduled for next weekend. At the hotel. I called the event coordinator and told her we were postponing. She paused. It was the first concrete thing I did, to make it real. How did it feel? She thought about it. Easier than I expected, she said, and then I felt guilty for how easy it was. Guilt's tricky that way, he said. Damien doesn't know yet, she said. I haven't told him. She looked at her hands. He'll want to talk about it. He'll want to reframe it as another form of cold feet, mine this time, something we can work through together in couples sessions with a therapist he'll choose and schedule. She shook her head. He's very good at making a plan for things. Are you going to let him? She looked at him directly. I don't know yet, she said. I'm trying to figure out the difference between being fair and just being afraid to finish it. That was the most honest thing she'd said, and she knew it when it came out. She could feel the shape of it, the admission that she didn't know yet, that she was still somewhere in the middle of it, that she hadn't made the clean, resolved decision that would have made for a better story. Landon didn't seem bothered by the middle. That makes sense, he said simply. It's a 4-year relationship. You're allowed to not know for a minute. Most people would tell me to give him another chance. I'm not most people, he said, and it's not my relationship. But if it were, she said, if someone you cared about had forgotten something that mattered, the way he forgot about my mother's surgery, what would you do? Landon was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee mug on the table slowly, a small rotation, thinking. I'd probably try to figure out if it was a failure of character or a failure of attention, he said, because those are different problems. And if you couldn't tell the difference? Then I'd pay attention to how they responded when I brought it up, he said, whether they were sorry for the hurt or just sorry it was being brought up. He looked at her. Which one was Damien? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and something in her expression changed. The specific closing off of a person who has just remembered all the things they walked out of. I have to take this, she said. Take it, he said. She stepped into the hallway. Not far, just enough for some privacy. And he heard her voice shift into the professional register, clear and controlled, the Vivian Sterling who ran a company. The conversation was brief and technical, something about a contract review and a signature deadline. She handled it in 4 minutes and came back in. Sorry, she said. You don't have to apologize, he said. You have a job. I have 40 people whose livelihoods depend on me making decisions clearly, she said. She sat back down, and the professional register faded. I keep thinking about that, how I've spent 4 years being very clear about everything in my professional life, and very unclear about everything in my personal one. Most people are, Landon said. It's easier to be competent at work. Work has defined rules. You know what success looks like. And in a relationship, you don't? In a relationship, someone keeps moving the definition, he said, at least in my experience. She looked at him. Your daughter's mother, she said. Not a question, but not confident either, more like a careful step. He nodded. You don't have to. It's fine, he said. It's not a secret. He picked up his mug. We were together 4 years, same as you and Damien, actually. She was good at a lot of things. Being present wasn't one of them. She loved Maya, but she loved her the way you love an idea, in the abstract, in the best version of what it could be. The actual daily reality of it was harder for her to want. He set the mug down. She left when Maya was 2. We have an arrangement. She visits twice a year, sends gifts, calls on birthdays. Maya knows her. It's not a disaster. It's just what it is. Does it hurt still? Vivian asked. It stopped hurting the way it used to, he said. Now it's more like background noise. You learn to live next to it. She was quiet. Then, I'm sorry. Don't be, he said. I got Maya out of it, and Maya is genuinely the best person I know, so. He shrugged, and it was a real shrug, unperformed. The math works out, but Vivian smiled at that. Smaller this time, private, like he'd said something that mattered and she was keeping it. The 40 minutes passed. Her call had come and gone, and she was still sitting at his kitchen table. He didn't point that out. She'd notice eventually. Can I ask you something? She said. Yeah. Why did you let me in that night? She said. You don't know me. It was midnight. I showed up in a state. Most people would have said the right sympathetic thing and pointed me back to the elevator. He thought about it. You looked like someone who needed to be somewhere that wasn't the obvious place, he said. I've needed that before. Felt like the least I could do was make room for it. That's a very simple reason. Most good things are, he said. She looked at him for a long second. He looked back, and neither of them looked away too quickly, and there was a specific quality to that moment. Not loaded, not romantic, not the thing that a different kind of story would make it into. More like two people who had both been carrying things for a long time, separately, and had found themselves briefly in the same place and noticed, with some surprise, that it was easier. Then her phone buzzed again, and the moment broke, and she looked at the screen and made a face. Damien, she said, you don't have to answer. I know, she said, but I should. Today. Not now, but today. She stood, and she picked up her coffee cup and her phone, and she went to the sink and rinsed the cup out without being asked, which was such a small domestic thing that he almost didn't notice it. Almost. I have a board alignment call at 2, she said, and I should probably talk to my lawyer this week. Prenup, he said. We never got that far, she said. Different kind of lawyer. The engagement was, there were shared financial commitments, event deposits, a joint investment we'd announced to both families. It needs to be untangled carefully. Sounds complicated. It is, she said. She put on her shoes. She'd come in wearing boots today, sensible ones, and picked up her bag from where she'd put it by the door. Landon. Yeah. I don't usually... She stopped, tried again. I don't have a lot of people I can talk to like this. Most people in my life have an investment in a version of me. My board wants one thing. My mother wants another thing. My friends are mostly also Damien's friends because that's how 4 years works. She looked at him. You don't have an investment. You have absolutely nothing to gain from any of this. That's true, he said. It's strange how much that matters, she said. Yeah, he said. I get that. She opened the door. She was halfway out when she turned back. The tea, she said. What about it? Next time you should try steeping it longer, and actually boiling the water first instead of just microwaving it. He stared at her. I don't microwave the water. You absolutely microwave the water, she said. I could tell. That is... He stopped. That's an unfair accusation. She almost smiled. Buy a kettle, Landon. She left. He closed the door and stood in the kitchen for a minute, and he thought about 4 years with someone, and about what it looked like when a person had been making a list for a long time without realizing it. He thought about the way she'd rinsed the cup without thinking, and how she'd sat at his kitchen table for twice as long as she'd meant to, and how she'd looked when she said, "I don't have a lot of people I can talk to like this." Not sad exactly, but honest in the way that things you've held in for a while tend to come out when you finally say them. He went to his desk and put his headphones on. Outside, the phone in his kitchen buzzed once with an incoming message. He let it sit. He'd check it in a while. He had work to do, and she had a life to untangle, and neither of those things was going to sort itself out by lunchtime. But she'd come back. He knew that. Not because of anything dramatic or declared, but just because she'd rinsed the cup and corrected his tea-making method on the way out the door, and people who were done didn't leave little footprints like that. He pulled up the audio timeline and got to work, and the city went on outside the window, loud and indifferent and completely uninterested in what had just changed. He bought a kettle. He didn't mention it the next time she came by. He just put it on the counter where she could see it, and when she noticed it, which she did within about 40 seconds of walking in, she didn't say anything either. She just looked at it and then looked at him and pressed her mouth together in a way that wasn't quite a smile but was in the same neighborhood. That was a Wednesday, 8 days after she'd returned the shirt. In those 8 days, she'd been back twice. Once for 20 minutes when she was between calls and needed somewhere to think that wasn't her own apartment, which still had Damien's coffee preferences stocked in the cabinet and his dry cleaning hanging in the hallway closet. Once for nearly 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon when Maya was at a birthday party and the building was quiet, and she and Landon had sat at his kitchen table and talked about nothing important for long enough that it became important. She'd talked to Damien twice. Both conversations had gone the way she'd known they would. Controlled on his end, careful, each word chosen to leave her with options she hadn't asked for. He wanted to try therapy. He had names of people, good ones, a couples counselor that a colleague had used. He wasn't ready to accept that they were finished, he said, because he didn't believe they were. He believed this was a crisis point. He believed crisis points, navigated well, made relationships stronger. She had listened, both times. She was still doing that, listening, measuring, trying to be fair to 4 years and to herself at the same time, which was harder than it sounded. The kettle helped. Not with that specifically, just in the general sense of having a place to go where someone had quietly adjusted a small thing based on something she'd said. She noticed those things more now, the specific weight of being paid attention to. It was a Tuesday when Damien showed up at Landon's door. She was in the middle of a sentence. Something about the board call from the day before. A disagreement with her CFO about the timeline on an acquisition, when the knock came. Landon's expression didn't change much. He got up, and she turned in her chair to face the door, and she already knew before he opened it. Not from anything she could have named exactly, just from the particular quality of the knock. 3 firm raps, the kind that announced rather than asked. Damien Cross was dressed for a business meeting. Gray suit, no tie, the collar open exactly 1 button in a way that was calculated to seem relaxed. He was 35 and looked it in the way that men who've had everything arranged well for them tend to. Maintained, assured, the kind of face that photographed well and knew it. He looked past Landon immediately. "Vivian," he said. Not hello. Not sorry to interrupt. Just her name, like a statement of ownership. "Damien," she said. He looked at Landon. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met properly." He extended a hand. "Damien Cross." Landon shook it once. "Landon Hayes." "Right." Damien's eyes went back to Vivian. "I've been calling you all morning." "I know," she said. "I was in the middle of something." "We need to talk." He said it like it was already decided, the conversation already scheduled, her attendance already confirmed. "Privately." "We're talking now," she said. Something tightened in his jaw, not anger. Damien didn't do overt anger. It wasn't his register, more like the micro-adjustment of a person recalculating. "I think it would be better if we—" "Landon," she said, "can you give us a minute?" Landon looked at her. There was a question in it. Not about whether to step back, but a real one, checking if she was all right with what she was about to walk into. She gave him a small nod. He moved toward the kitchen without a word. Damien came inside and closed the door. He looked around the apartment the way he looked around most spaces that weren't up to a standard he'd set. Not contemptuous, just assessing, placing it. "How long has this been going on?" he said. His voice was still controlled, still reasonable. "Nothing is going on," she said. "I come here to think." "You come here to—" He stopped. Reset. "Vivian, you're spending time in another man's apartment while we're trying to figure out if our relationship is—" "You're the one who's trying to figure it out," she said. "You said that, at the dinner table, in front of everyone." "That was a mistake," he said. "I've told you that. I panicked. The pressure of the timeline, the families, You told your parents you weren't sure you wanted to marry me," she said. "That's not a timeline problem. That's something you were already thinking." "I was overwhelmed. You forgot my mother's surgery," she said. He paused, just a beat, but she caught it. "I know," he said, "and I've apologized." "You explained it," she said. "You told me you'd been in a difficult stretch with the Harmon deal, and that you'd had 17 things on your plate." Which was true, probably. I don't doubt that it was true. She looked at him steadily. "But you didn't apologize for the fact that she had surgery and you didn't call. You apologized for your circumstances." He looked at her. His expression shifted, not quite to understanding, more like the face of someone who's encountered an argument they hadn't war-gamed in advance. "You've never said it like that before," he said. "I know," she said. "I wasn't ready to." The room was quiet. In the kitchen, she could hear the faint sound of Landon moving around. Not eavesdropping, just existing, being nearby in the way that a person could be nearby without being in the way. Damien crossed his arms. Not defensive. He'd been trained not to look defensive, but folded, contained. "I don't understand what this is," he said. "This—" He gestured at the apartment. "What you're getting from this that you can't get from talking to me." "Space to think without being managed," she said. The word landed. She watched it land. "I don't manage you," he said. "You called my mother," she said. "The morning after the dinner, before I'd said anything to her. You gave her your version of what happened so that when I called her, she was already—" She exhaled. "You don't even notice when you do it. That's the part I've taken the longest to see. It's not calculated exactly. It's just reflex. You control the information around you, and I'm information." His jaw moved. "That's not fair." "I know you believe that," she said. "I'm not saying it to hurt you. I'm saying it because I finally figured out how to say it." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of the assurance. Not all of it, but enough. "I love you," he said. "I know that doesn't fix anything you've just said, but I need you to know it's true." "I know it's true," she said. "Damien, I don't think you're lying about that." "Then—" "Loving someone isn't the same as seeing them," she said. "You love me. I don't think you see me. I think you see the version of me that fits alongside your life the way you want your life to look. And every time the real version showed up, scared about my mother, needing you to just call, you got uncomfortable and redirected, and I kept letting you because I thought I was being reasonable." She paused. "I was just disappearing in reasonable increments." The silence after that was different from the ones before it. Heavier. Damien looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at the kitchen doorway, and she could see him assembling something. Not quite an accusation, but close. "Did he put this in your head?" he said. "Because 3 weeks ago you weren't—" "3 weeks ago I was too tired to say it clearly," she said. "He didn't put anything in my head. He asked me questions. Mostly, I just answered them and heard myself." "Questions?" Damien said, flat. "Yes." "He asks you questions and you think he's different from every other man who's paid you attention. Don't do that," she said, quiet but firm. "Don't make this about him. This is about us. This has always been about us." Damien went still. He'd been doing well at maintaining the controlled exterior, but she could see the fault lines in it now. The tightness around his eyes, the way his breathing had gotten slightly shallow. He was a man who didn't lose arguments. He was running out of angles on this one. "I'm not walking away from 4 years," he said. "I'm not asking you to walk away from them," she said. I'm asking you to see them clearly, what they actually were, not the version you've been defending. He stood there for another moment. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He sat down on the edge of the couch, and he put his elbows on his knees, and he looked at the floor, not calculating, not managing, just at a loss. I don't know how to be in a relationship without trying to manage it, he said. His voice was quieter now. I know that's not a defense. I'm telling you the truth. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her in 4 years. She recognized it immediately because of how different it felt. I know, she said, gently but not hopefully. I believe you. So what does that mean for us? She took a breath. I think it means you need to figure that out, she said. The managing thing, with someone who can help you, but not with me on the other end of the experiment. He looked up. You've decided, he said. Not a question. I've decided, she said. He held her gaze for a moment, and she could see him wanting to argue, to find the counter, to restructure the conversation into something that ended differently. And then something in him seemed to understand that this was the version of her he hadn't been seeing. The one who meant it, fully, without a crack to slip a negotiation into. He stood. He straightened his jacket. He was already reassembling. The ring, he said. I'll have it messengered to you by Friday, she said. And the deposits. I've already spoken to my attorney. We can divide them equitably. You spoke to an attorney? Yes. He nodded once, slow. Okay, he said. And then, because he was Damien Cross and some part of him would always reach for the last word, I hope he's worth it. Landon was in the kitchen. He'd heard. She didn't know if he'd heard all of it, but he'd heard enough. He's not the point, she said. Damien left. She stood in the center of Landon's living room and listened to the elevator arrive and depart, and she waited for the feeling she'd expected. The regret, the second-guessing, the 4 years of a life weight of it. It came, but it wasn't what she'd braced for. More like a pressure releasing than a collapse. Like something that had been constricted for a long time finally being allowed to take up its full amount of space. Landon came out of the kitchen. He didn't say anything. He went to the counter and turned on the kettle, the new one, and got down 2 mugs. I ended it, she said. I know, he said. I heard. He said he hoped you were worth it. Yeah, he said. I heard that too. I told him you weren't the point. Also heard that. She looked at him. He was focused on the mugs, measuring out tea with the care of someone who'd been recently corrected on their technique. Are you okay? She said. He looked up. Are you okay is the question. I asked first. I'm fine, he said. That was his stuff, not mine. He handed her a mug. How are you? She took it. She thought about it honestly. Relieved, she said, and sad, and a little scared about what I just started. All 3 sounds right, he said. It doesn't feel like a mistake, she said. That's what I was most afraid of, that it would feel like a mistake the second I said it. She looked at the mug. It doesn't. Good, he said. She sat down on the couch, the same couch she'd slept on 3 weeks ago in someone else's shoes, wearing someone else's shirt. And he sat in the armchair across from her, and the apartment was quiet in the way it had been that first night, but cleaner now, simpler. He said, I've never said it clearly before, she said. The thing about the surgery, he was right. I haven't. She turned the mug in her hands. I kept making a case for why he was understandable. He was under pressure. He was handling a lot. I was so committed to being fair to him that I wasn't being honest with myself. It's easier to be fair to someone else, Landon said. Being fair to yourself requires admitting you deserved better. She looked at him. He was sitting with his feet flat on the floor and his own mug on the armrest, a man who'd never had the time or inclination to perform anything, just saying true things in a measured voice like it was the obvious option. How did you do it? She said. After Maya's mother left. How did you figure out how to be okay with it? He was quiet for a second. I didn't figure it out fast, he said. I was angry for a while. Not at her specifically, just at the gap between how I thought it was going to go and how it actually went. He shifted. And then Maya started doing new things. Walking, talking. She said my name for the first time when she was 13 months old. Da, that was it. not even a full word. And I thought, okay, this is what I'm for. I stopped asking the other question. What other question? Why it didn't work, he said. I stopped needing an answer to that. It didn't work. That was its own answer. Vivian looked at him. Outside, something in the street below beeped twice. A delivery truck, maybe, backing up. The kettle had long since gone quiet. The tea was going to be exactly right, she thought, properly steeped. I'm going to have to deal with a lot of fallout, she said. His family, my mother, our mutual circle. She exhaled. He was right about one thing. There's going to be a version of this story going around that I don't get to tell. There always is, he said. Doesn't it bother you, she said, that people form conclusions you can't correct? Sure, he said. And then I remember that most of the people whose opinions I can't control don't actually affect my life. He shrugged. The ones who matter usually ask. She looked at him across the coffee table, and she thought about 4 years of managing a narrative, of getting ahead of stories, of making sure the perception matched the version she'd authorized. She thought about how exhausting it had been, and how she'd just stopped caring about it, and how recently that had happened. The last 3 weeks, mostly. Sitting in this apartment, drinking tea that had gotten progressively better each time. Maya's going to ask why you're here, she said, when she gets home. Maya already knows why, he said. She's 6, not 4. She picks up on things. What does she think? He tilted his head slightly. She asked me last week if you were going to be sad for a long time, he said. Something moved in Vivian's chest. What did you tell her? I told her probably not, he said. I told her some people take a while to figure things out, and that's okay. That's... She stopped. Started again. That's a very good answer. She seemed satisfied, he said. She then went back to her book about the horse girl, so I think we're okay. Vivian laughed. Real, small, surprised out of her. It wasn't a large laugh, more like the first note of something. But it was genuine, and it was the kind of laugh that required you to be, at least for that second, okay? It felt like something she'd been holding in, without knowing it, for a long time. She sat in his apartment until Maya came home from school at 3:40, bursting through the door with a drawing she'd done in art class. A house with a very large sun and several abstract blobs she identified as people, and she held it up for Vivian's inspection with the serious pride of someone presenting a work for professional review. That one's you, Maya said, pointing to one of the blobs. It had yellow hair. Vivian's hair was dark. She didn't mention this. I love it, Vivian said, and meant it completely. Maya seemed satisfied. She put her backpack down in the wrong place, kicked off her shoes in the hallway, and went to the kitchen to ask her father for a snack. The conversation was immediate and practical. There was an ongoing negotiation about whether fruit snacks counted as actual fruit, which Landon was losing. Vivian sat on the couch and listened to them argue about it. She didn't check her phone. She didn't think about the messages that were probably accumulating, the calls from her mother, the quiet professional machinery of Damien beginning to rebuild his version of events for their shared social circle. She sat in the low afternoon light of an apartment on the 14th floor of a building that sounded more expensive than it was, and she listened to a 6-year-old explain why gummy things that came in a pouch were basically the same as actual grapes, and she felt not happy, exactly, not finished, not resolved, but real. Present, inside her own life in a way she hadn't been in longer than she could honestly track. Outside, November did what November did. The city moved, the light changed. She stayed a little longer than she meant to. She always did. The ring left on a Friday, as promised. Vivian had it packed in its original box, sealed in a padded courier envelope, and sent by a messenger service her assistant arranged. She didn't write a note. There was nothing left to add that the conversation in Landon's apartment hadn't already said. The messenger confirmation came back at 11:42, delivered, signed for, and she looked at it for a moment and then closed the notification and went back to the contract she'd been reviewing. Her assistant, a composed and perceptive woman named Claire, who had worked for her for 3 years and seen most things, said nothing about it. She just set a fresh coffee on Vivian's desk and left the room with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that the most useful thing she could do was exactly that. Vivian was grateful for it. She was grateful lately for a lot of small, quiet things she hadn't paid enough attention to before. The weeks that followed were not graceful. She hadn't expected them to be, and she didn't pretend otherwise, which was at least an improvement over how she'd historically handled hard periods, with a great deal of forward momentum and almost no acknowledgement of the wreckage moving behind her. This time she let herself feel the size of it. 4 years of a life, restructured, a social circle that had already begun the slow gravitational drift that happened when couples uncoupled, people choosing sides without announcing they were doing it, invitations that arrived a little more sparsely, a particular kind of careful silence from friends who'd been equally hers and Damien's and were now navigating the geography of loyalty. Her mother called 3 times the week after the ring was returned. The first call was shock. The second was questions, careful, worried, the particular interrogation of a woman who loved her daughter but had a fixed idea of what her daughter's life should look like by 30. The third was something approaching acceptance, reluctant and partial, but real. Her mother had not loved Damien exactly. She'd loved what Vivian having a Damien represented. That was different, and somewhere in the third call she seemed to arrive at that distinction herself. "I just want you to not be alone," her mother said. It wasn't an apology, but it was an explanation. "I'm not alone," Vivian said, and then because she was still working out how to talk about it, "I have people." She did. She had Claire, who brought coffee at the right moments. She had 2 board members she genuinely trusted. She had a college friend named Priya, who lived in another city, and who, when Vivian called and told her the whole story in one long unedited download, said nothing for a beat, and then said, "I never told you this, but I always thought he talked over you, like he couldn't quite hear you unless you were agreeing with him." Vivian had sat with that for a long time, and she had the 14th floor. Not in any defined way. Nothing had been named or agreed to, no conversation about what it was or wasn't. She went down when she needed somewhere to think, and Landon opened the door, and they had coffee or tea, and sometimes they talked about real things, and sometimes they talked about nothing. Maya had begun to expect her presence with the calm certainty of a child who had decided a thing was true and saw no reason to complicate it. It was a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after the ring left, when Maya looked up from her homework and said, with no particular lead-in, "Do you have a mom?" Vivian, who had been reading something on her phone while Landon finished a call in the other room, looked at the child across the kitchen table. Maya had her father's quality of asking questions that were more direct than they appeared. "I do," Vivian said. "She lives in Connecticut." "Do you see her a lot?" "Not as much as I probably should." Maya processed this with the seriousness of a 6-year-old weighing a moral issue. "My grandma lives in Ohio," she said. "We see her at Thanksgiving and one other time. She sends me books, good ones, not boring ones." "That's a good grandma," Vivian said. "She is," Maya agreed, turning back to her worksheet. Then, without looking up, "You should visit your mom. Moms get sad when you don't visit." Vivian looked at the top of Maya's head. The 2 uneven pigtails that Landon did on school mornings that were always slightly asymmetrical in the way of pigtails done by a person who was trying their best with limited practice, and felt something complicated move through her chest. "You're probably right," she said. "I'm usually right," Maya said, with no particular arrogance, just as a statement of fact. Landon came back in, phone call finished, and looked at the 2 of them at the table. He had the expression he sometimes got when he returned to find Maya and Vivian in conversation. Not surprised exactly, just quietly taking stock of something. "What'd I miss?" he said. "She's going to visit her mom," Maya said. He looked at Vivian. "Apparently," Vivian said. He got the coffee going without comment. She did call her mother that weekend. Not a full visit, not yet, but a real call, longer than the previous 3. One where she let her mother talk and didn't spend the whole time managing the conversation toward a conclusion she'd pre-approved. Her mother told her about her garden, about a neighbor's new dog, about a recipe she'd been trying to get right for 2 months. Small things, civilian things, the textures of a life Vivian sometimes forgot existed outside the velocity of her own. She listened to all of it and felt by the end something she hadn't felt with her mother in a while. Connected. Imperfectly. Incompletely. But connected. She didn't tell her mother about Landon. It was too soon to explain, and besides, she wasn't sure how to explain something she herself hadn't put into words yet. What she knew was this. She looked forward to going downstairs in a way that was different from how she'd looked forward to things in a long time. Not the anticipatory performance of looking forward to things, a dinner reservation, a trip, an event her calendar had scheduled her to enjoy. Actually looking forward. The specific, undramatic pull of wanting to be somewhere. She noticed it most on mornings when she had no excuse to go down. She'd make coffee in her own kitchen, stand at her own window, which had a better view, objectively, a full sweep of the skyline from the 16th floor, and find herself listening to the sounds of the building like she was trying to hear something specific. She didn't do anything about that. She recognized that some things needed to be left alone to figure out their own weight. Landon, for his part, was careful, not distant. He'd never been distant. It wasn't in his register, but deliberate, measured in a way she'd come to recognize as a feature of him rather than a limitation. He wasn't the kind of man who accelerated. He thought before he said things. He didn't fill silences reflexively. She'd learned over these weeks, a quality that she'd initially read as reserve, but understood now was more like steadiness, the particular composure of a person who'd been through something hard and had come out of it without needing to perform that he was fine. She asked him about it one evening when Maya was asleep, and they were sitting in the kitchen with the lights low, the kind of nighttime quiet that made honesty easier. "You never seem rattled," she said, "by any of this, by me showing up in your life." "I get rattled," he said. "I just do it privately." "What rattles you?" He thought about it. "When Maya's sick and I can't tell if it's a regular sick or a need to go somewhere sick," he said. "That gets me every time. I lose about 4 hours of productivity and probably age a year each time she runs a fever." She smiled. "That's a parent thing." "Yeah," he said. "Non-parent things." He paused. "I think I stopped being easily rattled by people around the time Maya turned 3. You just run out of bandwidth. Everything gets sorted into either actually a problem or not actually a problem, and most things turn out to be the second one." "Where do I fall?" she said. She said it carefully, not baiting, genuinely asking. He looked at her for a moment. "You're not a problem," he said. "That's not what I asked." He turned his mug on the table, that small rotation she'd come to recognize as him buying a second to be accurate. "You're a person who showed up," he said. "That's what you are. I haven't tried to put it in a box because I don't think it fits in one yet. Does that bother you, not having a box for it?" "Not really," he said. "Does it bother you?" She considered. "I'm used to knowing what category things are in," she said. "I'm used to having a structure." "I know," he said. "But no," she said. "It doesn't bother me, which is strange because it should." He nodded. "Yeah, I noticed that too." The conversation settled into silence, comfortable in the way that had become standard between them, neither of them filling it with noise, just occupying it. From Maya's room came the occasional sound of a small person redistributing in their sleep. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the city did its endless nighttime business. "I'm thinking about going to the Connecticut office next week," she said eventually. "We have a regional team there. I've been putting it off." "How long's the drive?" 2 hours. I probably stay 2 nights." "Good," he said. "You should get out of this building for a few days." She looked at him. There was something specific she'd been sitting with that she hadn't known how to bring up, and the smallness of the moment made it feel accessible. "I don't want to disappear on Maya," she said. "While I'm gone." Landon looked at her. He didn't say anything immediately, which meant he was taking it seriously. "She's going to be fine," he said. "She has school. She has routine." "I know," Vivian said. I'm not worried about that. I just meant..." She stopped, started again. "I've become part of the week for her. I don't want that to feel inconsistent." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "She knows you'll be back," he said. "You sure about that?" "She told me last week that you were going to teach her how to make coffee when she's older," he said. "She has plans. She's not worried." Vivian laughed, that surprised, involuntary one that kept appearing around this kitchen table. "She told you that?" "She told me it was a when," Not an if, he said. Her words. She shook her head. She's 6. She's very sure about things for 6, he said. I don't know where she gets it. You, Vivian said. Obviously you. He made a face like he wasn't sure that was a compliment and was deciding whether to take it as one. She went to Connecticut. She stayed 2 nights at a hotel that was clean and quiet and had absolutely nothing wrong with it and still felt vaguely like somewhere she was just passing through. She ran her regional meetings, walked through the team, had dinner with the Connecticut office manager and his wife, and talked shop in a way that was genuinely engaging. She called her mother from the hotel room the first night, and her mother seemed surprised and then pleased. They talked for 40 minutes. Her mother told her the neighbor's dog was a labradoodle named Biscuit. On the second night, she sat on the hotel bed and looked at her phone for a while, and then she called Landon. Not texted, called. She hadn't done that before. He answered on the 3rd ring. Hey. Hey, she said. Is this a bad time? It's 8:45, he said. Maya's asleep. I'm watching something bad on television. How bad? There's a competition show about people who build extreme tree houses, he said. It's objectively terrible. I've seen 3 episodes. She laughed. How's Maya? Good. She lost a tooth today, the second bottom one. She was unreasonably philosophical about it. What did she say? She said, and I quote, "It doesn't hurt when it falls out, just when it's almost but not quite out, which is like a lot of things." He paused. Then she asked if we had anything good for dinner. Vivian was quiet for a second. She's something, she said. Yeah, he said. She is. The call lasted 20 minutes. They didn't talk about anything important. The treehouse show, a difficult client he'd dealt with that afternoon, whether Connecticut in November was as depressing as he imagined. It was the kind of call that existed for its own sake, not to transfer information or manage something, just to stay in contact with a person whose proximity had started to matter. She noticed what it was. She didn't name it. She let it be what it was. When she came back Thursday evening, she went upstairs first, put her bag down, and stood in her apartment for a few minutes. It was beautiful up there. She'd never stopped finding it beautiful. The clean lines, the view, the particular quality of space that a well-designed room had when it was exactly what it was supposed to be. She'd chosen everything in it deliberately, and it reflected her well. A good life. Visible. She stood at the window and looked at the city for a while. Then she picked up a small thing she'd bought at a shop near the Connecticut hotel. A painted wooden fox, small enough to fit in a palm, the kind of thing a child's bookshelf absorbed easily. And she went downstairs. Landon opened the door. He looked at her for a second, and she saw something in his expression that he didn't try to hide. Relief, maybe, or just the simple acknowledgement that she was back and that registered. Hey, he said. Hey, she said. I got Maya something. He stepped back. She came in. Maya was on the couch with her book, and when she saw Vivian, she looked up with the composed pleasure of someone whose prediction had been confirmed. You're back, she said. I'm back, Vivian said. She held out the small fox. Maya took it, turned it in her hands, and examined it with the thoroughness of a museum curator assessing a new acquisition. He's a fox, Maya said. He is, Vivian said. Does he have a name? Not yet. I thought you could name him. Maya looked at the fox, then at Vivian. Chester, she said immediately with total confidence. Chester it is, Vivian said. Maya nodded, satisfied, and returned to her book with Chester positioned on her knee, and that was that. Landon was in the kitchen. She could hear the kettle. She went in and sat at the table, and he handed her a mug without asking, and the tea was exactly right, properly steeped, properly hot, the chamomile a little stronger than most people made it, which was how she'd told him she liked it one afternoon when he'd asked. He'd just remembered. He hadn't made a thing of it. He'd just remembered and adjusted and done it the right way from then on, the way people did when they were actually paying attention. She wrapped her hands around the mug. He sat across from her. Good trip? He said. Good trip, she said. Useful. She paused. I called my mother. Yeah, you mentioned. On the phone. I meant again, he said. Tonight, from the car. She's doing well. She sounded, I don't know, lighter than she has in a while. She looked at the mug. I think she was more stressed about the engagement than she let on. Not the engagement ending, just the whole thing, the pressure of it. Mothers usually are, he said. They pick up the weight and then don't mention they've been carrying it. She looked at him. How do you know that? My mother, he said simply. Same thing. Where is she? Denver, he said. She comes out twice a year. She and Maya have a whole relationship independent of me that I'm mostly kept out of, which I think is correct. Vivian smiled. Do you tell her things? Some things, he said. Not everything. She'd worry. Has she worried about you lately? He looked at her. The question was clear. She was asking if his mother knew about her, about this, about whatever this was. He didn't dodge it. I mentioned that things had been less predictable than usual, he said. She said that sounded like a good sign. Vivian raised an eyebrow. A good sign. She's a simple read on the world, he said. Predictable is fine. Less predictable means something's happening. She sat with that. Is something happening? She said. He looked at her steadily. Yeah, he said. I think so. I want to be careful about it. Careful how? Careful like... He paused. You just ended something real, and I don't want to be the thing you ran toward before you figured out what you're running toward. He said it without apology, just plainly. I want any future version of this to be a choice, a clear one, not a reaction. She looked at him for a long time. The kitchen was warm and quiet. Chester the fox was being positioned by Maya on the bookshelf in the living room with the spatial reasoning of an architect. That's the most careful thing anyone has ever said to me, Vivian said. I mean it, he said. I know you do, she said. That's why it matters. She didn't tell him that she'd already been asking herself the same question, whether what she felt when she came down those 2 flights of stairs was real or just the contrast of relief, the warmth of a person who'd seen her at her worst and handed her tea without making it a thing. She'd been trying to be honest with herself about that, in the same way she'd learned slowly to be honest about other things. But what she kept arriving at when she sat with it long enough and got past the noise was something quieter and sturdier than reaction, something that had been building in increments she hadn't named while they were happening. She didn't say all of that. She said, I'm not going anywhere, and let it mean what it meant. He nodded. From the living room, Maya said, with the authority of someone announcing a decision that wasn't up for discussion, Chester is going next to the horse books. He'd like it there. They both looked toward the living room. Good call, Landon said. I know, Maya said. Vivian looked at the mug in her hands and the kitchen around her and the man across the table who made tea the right way now because she'd said something once and he'd just, quietly, without ceremony, listened. Outside, November was doing what it did. But in here, the light was warm, and Maya was narrating Chester's introduction to the bookshelf with the thoroughness of a nature documentary, and Landon was looking at Vivian in the calm, unhurried way of someone who had decided to see what something became without needing it to be named first. It wasn't perfect. It was better than that. It was real, and it was still becoming. And neither of them was in a hurry to make it into something it hadn't finished being yet. 3 weeks after the ring left by courier, on a Saturday morning when the sky had finally committed to something other than gray, Vivian Sterling stood in her kitchen on the 16th floor and made a decision. Not about the company, not about the Connecticut expansion or the board alignment or the acquisition timeline her CFO had been pushing since October. Those decisions she made every day, cleanly, with data and instinct and the particular confidence that came from years of building something and knowing its weight. This was different. She'd been standing there for 20 minutes with a bag of coffee beans she'd bought the day before, Ethiopian single origin from the specialty roaster 3 blocks over, the kind that cost more than it probably should and was worth every dollar. And she was thinking about a man 2 floors below her who made tea with a kettle he'd bought because she told him to. She was thinking about the way he'd said, I want any future version of this to be a choice, a clear one. She was thinking about how she'd sat with that for 3 weeks and turned it over and looked at it from every angle she could find, the way she did with contracts and proposals and anything that mattered, and how every time she came back to the same thing, she wasn't running toward him because she was running from Damien. That had stopped being true. If it had ever been entirely true, Sometime around the third or fourth time she'd sat at his kitchen table and realized she wasn't thinking about Damien at all. She was just there, present, wanting to be exactly where she was. She picked up the coffee beans. She picked up her keys. She went downstairs. She didn't call ahead. She knocked 3 times, same as the first night, though she understood now that nothing about this knock was the same as that one. That knock had been a person escaping. This one was a person arriving. Landon opened the door. He was in a worn gray t-shirt and jeans and his socks, which was how he existed on Saturday mornings, and he had the slightly unfocused look of someone who'd been in the middle of something. He looked at her. He looked at the bag in her hand. "Coffee beans," she said. "I can see that," he said. "Good ones," she said. "Ethiopian. The roaster on Clement Street. I know the place. I thought—" She paused. She'd had this more organized in her head on the elevator ride down. "I thought you might want to have dinner, tonight, with me. Not here." She watched his face. "Like an actual dinner? At a restaurant? You and me." He looked at her for a moment. The morning light was coming in from the window behind him, and she could see him processing it. Not stalling, just being accurate, the way he always was. "What about Maya?" he said. "I already texted your mother," she said. "She said she'd drive up." He stared at her. "You texted my mother." "Last Tuesday," she said. "I wanted to ask first, before I asked you." She saw his expression. "Too much?" "No," he said slowly. "Just, you texted my mother." "She was very nice," Vivian said. "She said yes immediately. She also said, and I'm quoting, 'It's about time someone took that boy somewhere.' Her words." Something moved across his face. Surprise giving way to something warmer and less composed. The expression of a man who'd been outmaneuvered by someone he respected and didn't entirely mind. "Come in," he said. She came in. Maya was at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal, and Chester the fox positioned beside her plate, like a dining companion. She looked up when Vivian walked in and registered the coffee beans with interest. "Is that the fancy kind?" she said. "It is," Vivian said. "Dad only has regular," Maya said. "I know," Vivian said. "That's why I brought it." Maya nodded approvingly and went back to her cereal. Landon was already getting down the coffee equipment, moving around the kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who'd done it 10,000 times, and Vivian sat at the table in her usual chair. It had become her usual chair without anyone assigning it, just from frequency, and put the coffee bag on the table. "My grandma's coming tonight," Maya said. Not a question. She'd apparently already been told. "She is," Landon said from the counter. He looked at Vivian over his shoulder with an expression that was trying to be neutral and not entirely succeeding. "That means you and Vivian are going out," Maya said, with the casual certainty of someone who had reached this conclusion some time ago and was only now confirming it publicly. "We are," Vivian said. Maya picked up Chester and considered this. "Okay," she said. "Grandma lets me stay up later." "I'm aware," Landon said, "and she makes her pancakes the next morning." "I'm also aware." "So," Maya said with the satisfaction of someone who had assessed all relevant variables, "this is a good plan." Vivian looked at the child across the table, the uneven pigtails, the fox in one hand, the calm assurance of a person who had decided how things were going to be and found the outcome acceptable. And she felt the thing she always felt around Maya, which was something like being trusted with something careful and important, and the particular responsibility of not dropping it. "I think so too," Vivian said. Landon made the coffee. He used the Ethiopian beans, measured them with the attention of someone who'd been instructed at some point, and retained the instruction. And when he set the mug in front of her, it was right. The temperature, the strength, the cup. She didn't say anything about it. She just drank it, and it was good. "Where are you taking him?" Maya asked. "Maya," Landon said. "I'm asking," Maya said. "There's a place on Birchwood," Vivian said. "Italian, small room, good food." Maya considered. "Does it have those noodles with the hole in the middle?" "Rigatoni," Vivian said. "Probably, yes." "Dad likes those," Maya said, and returned to her cereal. Landon sat down with his own coffee and looked at Vivian across the table, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and it wasn't uncomfortable in the least. That was the thing about the time they'd accumulated. It had produced a silence that was livable, companionable in the way that required history to build, small shared history, the kind made from 3-hour kitchen conversations and bad chamomile tea, and a child who named foxes Chester and had opinions about rigatoni. "You planned this," he said. It was somewhere between an observation and something almost like appreciation. "I made a decision," she said. "There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Planning is about the outcome," she said. "Deciding is about what you want." He looked at her steadily. "And what do you want?" She met his eyes. "To find out what this is," she said, without treating it like a risk assessment, without waiting until I'm sure of every variable. She set her mug down. "I've spent most of my adult life being very strategic about things, and I'm good at it. I'll probably always be good at it." She paused. "But I think I've been using strategy as a reason not to decide, and I'm tired of that." He was quiet for a moment. "I told you I wanted it to be a clear choice," he said. "I know," she said. "This is me making a clear choice." "Dinner," he said. "Dinner," she confirmed. "We can figure out the rest after." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the thing she'd come to recognize as him arriving at something. Not impulsive, just settled. A man who didn't move until he meant it, but who, when he moved, moved without hesitation. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. From the other side of the table, Maya set Chester upright against her orange juice with the finality of a person who had witnessed a satisfactory conclusion and was ready to move on. "Can we go to the park?" she said. "Before Grandma comes." They went to the park. It was the kind of November morning that occasionally remembered it was supposed to be beautiful. Cold, clear, the sky a deep, unambiguous blue above the bare-limbed trees. Maya ran ahead on the path in her yellow coat, stopping to inspect things with the thoroughness she brought to everything. A particularly shaped rock, a dog being walked by a man with a red hat, a section of fence where someone had woven fallen leaves into the chain link in a careful pattern. Landon and Vivian walked behind her. Not close enough to be obvious about anything, just close in the way of two people who'd stopped needing to maintain a careful distance. Their arms brushed once on a narrow stretch of path. Neither of them moved away. "She does that every time," Landon said. "Inspects everything." "Like she's cataloging," Vivian said. "She keeps a notebook," he said, "drawings of things she finds. Rocks, mostly, but also birds, and once a very specific cloud formation that she was convinced looked like a submarine." "Did it?" "A little bit," he admitted. "I didn't want to encourage it because then we'd be cloud people, and I don't have the bandwidth." Vivian smiled. They walked for a while. "I've been thinking about something you said," she said eventually, "a few weeks ago, about not wanting to be the thing I ran toward before I figured out where I was going." "Yeah," he said. "I understand why you said it," she said. "And you were right to say it. But I want you to know." She chose her words carefully because they mattered, and she wanted to be accurate. "I know the difference now, between relief and wanting. I've had time to feel both, and what I feel when I come downstairs isn't relief anymore. It's—" She paused. "It's wanting to be there. That's different." He walked for a moment without answering, and she let him. He was always going to take the time to be honest. That was the thing about him she'd understood from early on. He wasn't slow, he was careful. Those weren't the same. "I know," he said finally. "I think I've known for a while." He looked at her sideways. "I was waiting for you to know too." "And now I do," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Now you do." Ahead of them, Maya had stopped at a bench to negotiate with a squirrel that had positioned itself at a very close distance. She was explaining something to it in a patient, reasonable tone. The squirrel appeared unimpressed. "She's going to be something," Vivian said. "She already is something," he said. "You know what I mean?" "Yeah," he said, and his voice had the quality it always had when he talked about Maya. Steady, certain, the voice of a man who had organized his entire life around one small person and had made peace with that, and then some. "She's going to be a lot of things. Good things." He paused. I used to worry about her early on, whether I was doing it right, whether she was missing something without... He didn't finish that sentence. She turned out fine. Better than fine. You gave her stability, Vivian said. She knows where she is every day. That's not a small thing. No, he said. It's not. They reached the bench where Maya had been conducting her squirrel negotiation. The squirrel had departed. Maya was now drawing something in the small notebook she'd apparently had in her coat pocket the whole time. Is that the catalog? Vivian said. The squirrel, Maya said without looking up. He was a gray one, but one of his ears was darker than the other. I've never seen that before. She showed them the drawing, a small, earnest oval with ears and a tail, one ear shaded heavily with pencil. I'm going to look it up when we get home. Good plan, Landon said. What if it's a new species? Maya said. Then you'll be very famous, he said. Maya seemed to find this an acceptable outcome and went back to refining the drawing. Vivian watched her and thought about how strange it was, the way life assembled things, how a midnight knock on the wrong door had produced this. A Saturday morning in a park, cold air, a yellow coat ahead of them on a path, the small catalog of a 6-year-old's found world. She hadn't planned any of it. She'd just been desperate and exhausted and had gotten off an elevator 2 floors early, and everything that followed had followed because she'd knocked and he'd opened the door, and neither of them had made it into more than it was until it had become more on its own. That was the part that felt true, that she hadn't manufactured this. It had just accumulated, quietly, in increments, the way the things that last tend to. She thought about the list she'd made the night after Damien left her apartment, the 2 columns, what she had and what she was pretending not to see. She'd thrown it away after a few days. She hadn't needed it anymore. But she remembered the length of the second column, and she remembered the moment she'd looked at it and understood that the life she'd been in had slowly been asking her to be less than she was, and she'd been complying and she hadn't even noticed until she'd stopped. She noticed now. She noticed most things more clearly now. That was what happened when you stopped spending energy on maintenance. Landon's mother arrived at 4:30 in a car that needed a wash, and with a bag that suggested she'd packed for a week despite being told one night. She was a solid, warm woman in her early 60s with Landon's eyes and a directness that was clearly hereditary. She hugged Maya first, which was correct, and then she looked at Vivian with an expression that was assessing without being unfriendly. "You're the neighbor," she said. "I am," Vivian said. "He mentioned you," Landon's mother said. "Mom," Landon said. "I said you existed," she said to Vivian. "I said he'd mentioned you existed." "That's very diplomatic," Vivian said. The older woman smiled. "I like her," she said, to no one in particular, and went inside with Maya, who was already explaining the squirrel situation. Landon looked at Vivian. "Don't say anything," he said. "I wasn't going to say anything," she said. "You were going to say something." "I was going to say your mother seems wonderful," she said. He looked at the ceiling of the hallway. They left at 6:30. The restaurant was small and warm and smelled like garlic and something slow cooked, and the host seated them at a corner table without being asked, which Vivian took as a good sign. They ordered wine, a Barolo, which the server recommended, and they both deferred to, which was already different from the way dinner had worked with Damien, who'd always chosen and always been right about it, and never quite asked. Landon looked at the menu with the focused attention he brought to most things. "They have rigatoni," he said. "I noticed," she said. "For the record, I don't only like those because Maya said it." "I know," she said. "She just confirmed what she already knew about you." He looked up. There was something in his expression, not quite a smile, something quieter and more durable than a smile. The expression of someone who was exactly where they decided to be and had no complaints about it. They talked over dinner the way they talked in the kitchen, easily, with real things mixed in with ordinary things, neither of them performing. She told him about the acquisition she was considering, not the full business case, just the part she found genuinely interesting, the technology, what it could mean for the hospital networks. He asked good questions, not because he was an expert, but because he was paying attention. And she found that she answered more honestly than she did in board meetings where everyone had an angle. He told her about a project he'd just taken on, a podcast series for a nonprofit, something he'd been approached about before and always declined because the timing wasn't right. He'd said yes this time. She asked why now, and he said, "I think I was waiting until I had more capacity, and I think I confused capacity with certainty." He paused. Some things you just have to start and see. She thought about that for a while. "That's good advice," she said. "For other things too." "Yeah," he said. "I know." The Barolo was excellent. The rigatoni, when it arrived, was everything Maya had implicitly promised. They stayed 2 hours and didn't rush any of it. On the walk back to the Caldwell, the air had gone colder, and her breath made small clouds that disappeared. He walked beside her without theater. No performed gestures, no hand extended with the deliberateness of someone making a point. At one point, on the narrow stretch of sidewalk near the building entrance, her shoulder came against his arm and stayed there for half a block, and neither of them adjusted. That was how it was. Nothing announced, nothing performed, just the simple adjacency of two people who'd stopped pretending not to prefer each other's company. In the lobby, at the elevator, she pressed 16 and he pressed 14. They stood there while the elevator groaned its way upward. The same elevator where they'd spent 11 minutes talking about Thai food, what felt like a different lifetime. "This is the elevator," she said. "I know what elevator it is," he said. "The first time we talked," she said. "Really talked." He looked at her. "We talked about the Thai place." "I know," she said. "We've come a long way from the Thai place." He almost smiled. Almost. "Yeah," he said. "We have." The elevator reached 14. The doors opened. He stepped out and then turned back, and she was looking at him from inside the elevator with her hand against the door to keep it open, and there was a pause. Not awkward, not loaded with anything that needed to be declared, just a pause that held a real thing in it. "Thank you," he said, "for planning this." "Deciding," she said. "There's a difference." "Right," he said, "for deciding." She looked at him for a moment. "Same time next week?" she said. "Yeah," he said. "Same time next week." She let the door close. The elevator continued up. She stood in it alone for the 2 floors between his life and her apartment, and she thought about midnight knocks and kettles and one-eared squirrels and the particular way a person could change your whole idea of what you were supposed to be looking for without ever trying to. Upstairs, her apartment was quiet and beautiful and exactly as she'd left it. She stood at the window for a moment. The city was out there doing its irreducible thing, moving, lit, indifferent, enormous. She looked at it, and she thought about what Landon had said once about stopping the question of why something didn't work, about letting that be its own answer and turning toward what was true instead. She thought about the second column on a list she'd thrown away, and how different everything felt when you stopped pretending it wasn't there. She thought about a 6-year-old who told her to visit her mother and had meant it as fact, not advice. She thought about Chester on the bookshelf next to the horse books. She thought about 14 being a good floor. Some things you didn't plan. Some things you just knocked on the door and waited to see if someone would open it. And when they did, you had the sense not to walk away. She hadn't walked away. She'd come back. And every time she had, the door had been there. That was the thing about a person who was steady. They didn't make a performance of being reliable. They just were. Day after day, cup of tea at a time, small adjustments made without ceremony, attention paid without announcement. It was the least dramatic thing in the world, and it turned out to be the thing she'd been most hungry for longer than she'd known. She turned away from the window. She went to bed. 2 floors below, in an apartment with a bookshelf that had a painted fox on it, and a kettle on the counter, and a notebook full of found things on the coffee table, a man who had opened a door at midnight 3 weeks ago because someone had needed somewhere to be was probably doing the same. Neither of them knew exactly what came next. That was fine. That was actually fine. They had time. The Barolo had been Vivian's idea. Not the wine specifically, though she'd been the one to suggest the restaurant on Birchwood, the small Italian place with the corner table and the slow-cooked smell that hit you the moment you walked in. She'd been the one to call ahead and make a reservation for 2 on a Saturday evening 3 weeks after she'd stood in Landon's living room and ended 4 years of her life while he made tea in the kitchen. She'd planned the whole thing, texted his mother, bought the coffee beans, knocked on his door with the deliberate calm of someone who had finally stopped waiting to feel ready. But before all of that, before the dinner and the elevator and the walk home with their shoulders touching on the narrow sidewalk, there were 3 weeks that didn't look like anything from the outside. 3 weeks of ordinary Tuesday afternoons and early November rain and a child's homework spread across a kitchen table. 3 weeks of two people who had stopped pretending they didn't prefer each other's company without yet naming what that meant. That was the part nobody saw. That was the part that mattered most. It started the Monday after Damien left the building. Vivian had gone upstairs that afternoon and done the things she'd been putting off. She called her attorney. She emailed the event coordinator a final cancellation. She drafted a message to the mutual friends she'd been avoiding and kept it short and non-explanatory, because she'd decided she didn't owe anyone a version of events that included Damien's feelings as a primary consideration. She ordered dinner from the Thai place on the corner, the one she and Landon had debated the first time they'd been stuck in the elevator, and ate it at her kitchen counter while reviewing a contract addendum that her CFO had flagged. It was a completely functional evening. She managed it fine, but at 9:15, when the work was done and the containers were in the recycling and the apartment had gone quiet, in the specific way of a well-designed space that had only one person in it, she found herself standing at her window with nothing particular to do and no particular reason to stay exactly where she was. She didn't go downstairs. It was late, and she'd already taken enough of his evenings, and she was trying to be conscious of the difference between needing somewhere to go and simply wanting to. She stood at the window for a while and then went to bed, and she was fine, but she noticed the wanting. She filed it accurately. The Tuesday was easier because she had a full day of meetings that didn't allow for much peripheral thought. She was on back-to-back calls from 8 to 2, and then she had an in-person with her legal team about the contract language on the Connecticut acquisition. And by the time it was over, it was 4:30, and her brain was running on its last quarter tank. She went downstairs without deciding to. Just got in the elevator and pressed 14. Landon opened the door in his headphones, which meant she'd interrupted work, and she immediately said, "I can come back." And he shook his head and stepped aside, and she came in. He finished whatever he was listening to, made a note on the pad of paper by his desk, and came to the kitchen where she'd already put the kettle on. "Legal day," she said, by way of explanation. "I can tell," he said. "How?" "You walked in like the building owed you something," he said. She looked at him. "That's very specific." "You have different walks," he said, getting down the mugs. "There's the regular one, the I have a call in 20 minutes one, and the one where someone's been making you defend a position you were right about for 6 hours straight." She stared at him. "You've cataloged my walks." "I didn't set out to," he said. "It just happened." She sat down. She thought about that, about being observed carefully enough that the observation became unconscious, just a thing someone knew about you the way they knew which mug you preferred and how long to steep the tea. It wasn't an invasion. It felt like the opposite of an invasion. It felt like being seen in the uncomplicated way that didn't ask for anything back. "The Connecticut deal is giving me a headache," she said. "Tell me," he said. So she did. Not the full legal landscape, she wasn't looking for counsel, but the shape of the frustration, the particular way that sometimes a decision you'd already made had to survive 7 more conversations before it became real. He listened and asked the kind of questions that weren't about the deal but about her. What does it actually change if it falls through? Is this a must-have or a want-to-have? And she found herself answering them and finding in the answering what she actually thought. "It's a want-to-have," she said finally. "I've been treating it like a must-have because my CFO is very convinced." "What do you think?" "I think it's a good acquisition at the right price," she said, "and I think the right price is about 15% lower than where we're currently negotiating." "Then say that," he said. "I have said that." "Say it again," he said. "With the walk." She looked at him. He looked back, and his expression was perfectly neutral, and she recognized the very specific experience of being gently, accurately called on something. She laughed. It was the real kind, the kind that came from somewhere honest. "The walk," she said. "It's effective, Itit," he said. Whatever it is you're doing when you walk like that. I'll take it under advisement, she said. Maya came home at 3:45 and went directly to her father to report, in comprehensive detail, that her class had done a science experiment involving baking soda and vinegar, that the result was exactly as expected, and that her friend Cora had managed to knock the entire setup onto the floor, and that it had been, in Maya's measured assessment, kind of worth it to watch. Did Cora get in trouble? Landon asked. A little, Maya said, but she laughed, so it was okay. She looked at Vivian. Do you know why vinegar and baking soda do that? A chemical reaction, Vivian said. The acid and the base combine and produce carbon dioxide gas. Maya processed this. So it's basically burping, she said. Essentially, Vivian said. That's actually a good explanation, Landon said. I have a 7-year-old's understanding of chemistry now, Vivian said. I'm very proud. Maya took a snack and went to do homework with the focused efficiency of someone who wanted it finished so she could move on to more interesting things. The kitchen settled back into the rhythm it had in the late afternoon. Homework sounds, the occasional question called out, Landon refilling the mugs without being asked, the November light going gold and then gray outside the window. Vivian stayed until 6. She hadn't planned to, she just did. That was how the weeks went. Not every day. She had a company to run and a life being restructured, and some days she was in back-to-back meetings until 7 and came home too depleted to be a person in any useful sense. But 4 or 5 times a week she found herself on the 14th floor, in the chair that had become her chair, at the table that had become a place where she was allowed to be tired or sharp or uncertain without it being a problem. She started noticing the specific textures of his life that she'd been too careful to look at directly before. The way he organized his desk, meticulously, because sound work required precision, but the periphery was always slightly cluttered with Maya-related detritus, a crayon here, a library book there, a drawing taped to the monitor at an angle that suggested Maya had taped it, and he hadn't straightened it because it was Maya's. The way he handled Maya's moods, she was 6, she had moods. Sometimes she came home from school with a grievance against a classmate or a teacher, and she needed to report it fully before she could let it go, and Landon let her. He didn't minimize or redirect. He asked follow-up questions, real ones. He took her seriously. She watched him do this one Thursday evening when Maya came home upset about something that had happened at recess, an incident with a friend that had gone sideways in the complicated way of first-grade social dynamics. And he sat with her at the kitchen table while Vivian worked quietly at the counter, and he listened to the whole thing without once suggesting it wasn't a big deal. It sounds like you felt left out, he said. I was left out, Maya said, correcting the tense with precision. You're right, he said. You were. She didn't have to do it that way, Maya said. No, he said, she didn't. But she's still my friend, Maya said, working through it. Yeah, he said. Both things can be true. Maya sat with that for a moment. Then she asked for a snack and went to find Chester. And the matter was, if not resolved, at least set down somewhere manageable. Vivian looked at him from across the kitchen. You do that well, she said. What? Hold the thing with her without fixing it, she said. Most people jump straight to the solution. You just stay in it with her. He shrugged, but she could tell the observation landed. She needs to figure it out herself, he said. I can't do that for her. I can just be there while she does. She thought about that for the rest of the evening. She thought about how rarely she'd experienced that, someone staying in a hard thing with her instead of maneuvering her out of it. She thought about all the ways Damien had been good at solutions and absent from the actual sitting with it, and how she'd confused the two for so long, and how she didn't anymore. There was an evening, the second week, when it rained heavily enough to make the window light go dark by 4 o'clock, and Maya fell asleep on the couch with Chester on her chest, which happened sometimes when she'd had a big day and her body just made the decision for her. Landon covered her with the blanket from the closet, the good one, the one he used himself, and came back to the kitchen table, and he and Vivian sat there in the low light with the rain coming down outside and talked in the quiet voices of people in a room with a sleeping child. They talked about his podcast project, the nonprofit series he'd just started, a history of the city's waterfront labor movement told through audio interviews with descendants of the original dock workers. He was 3 sessions in and had found a 91-year-old woman in the Richmond district whose grandfather had been one of the key organizers in the 1930s. And the recordings were, in his words, almost too good, like the material knows it only has one chance to exist. "Can I hear one?" Vivian said. He looked at her like she'd surprised him. "Yeah," he said. "If you want." He got his laptop and put on headphones and handed her one earbud, and she leaned in slightly to share the audio. And what she heard for the next 12 minutes was an old woman's voice, weathered, specific, unhurried, talking about her grandfather's hands, the way they looked at the end of a shift, the way he'd taught her to shake hands firmly, like you meant it, because he'd spent his life around men who judged each other's character by the grip. When it ended, Vivian sat back. "That's remarkable," she said. "I know," he said. There was something different in his voice when he talked about the work. Quieter, more precise, like he was handling something fragile. She didn't know any of that history until she started talking. It just came up. "Is that what good interviews do?" "The best ones," he said. "The person goes somewhere they didn't expect to go." She thought about the first night on his couch, all those weeks ago, the way she'd talked until she heard herself clearly for the first time in years. "I know that feeling," she said. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I thought you might." The rain came down. Maya redistributed in her sleep, one arm going over the edge of the couch, and then being retrieved. Chester slid to the cushion beside her. "I want to tell you something," Vivian said. "Okay," he said. "I've been trying to figure out the right way to say it, and I think there isn't a right way, so I'm just going to say it." She looked at the table, then at him. "I don't know what this is. I don't know exactly what we are or where it's going, and I've noticed that I'm not bothered by that, which is unusual for me." She paused. "But I'm also aware that I've been here, in this apartment, pretty consistently for 2 weeks, and I haven't said anything about it, and I think that's its own kind of, I think it's a thing that probably deserves acknowledgement." He was looking at her steadily. "What would you want to say about it?" he asked. "That I'm glad I'm here," she said. "When I'm here, that I'm not just passing through because I don't have anywhere better to be. I'm here because this is where I want to be." She held his gaze. "I wanted you to know the difference." He was quiet for a moment. "I know the difference," he said. "I know you do," she said. "I wanted to say it anyway." He nodded once. "I'm glad you're here too," he said. "When you're here." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't the beginning of something that needed to be categorized. It was just two people sitting across a table in the rain, saying true things to each other in quiet voices, which was maybe the whole of what honesty actually looked like when it wasn't trying to impress anyone. The following week had a harder edge to it. Her mother came to visit. Not a planned trip, just a drive down from Connecticut, her mother's way of handling things she couldn't settle over the phone. She arrived on a Wednesday morning with a bag of homemade food in the way of mothers who didn't know how else to show up, and she sat in Vivian's kitchen and looked at the view and said, "It's very beautiful up here, very—" She searched for the word. "Composed." "That's what I was going for," Vivian said. Her mother looked at her with the particular look of a woman who had raised her daughter and knew most of her tells. "Are you all right?" she said. Not the social version of the question, the real one. "Yes," Vivian said, and then, because her mother deserved an honest answer, "Not all the time, but mostly yes, more than I expected." "And Damien," her mother said carefully. "Is fine," Vivian said. "He'll be fine. He's a capable person. He'll reorganize." She paused. "He called my attorney last week to dispute one of the deposit divisions, so I think he's going to be okay." Her mother almost smiled. "That does sound like him." "It does," Vivian agreed. Her mother stayed for lunch. She found the kettle on the counter and the Ethiopian coffee beans in the cabinet and gave them a long look, but said nothing. She ate the food she'd brought, a soup Vivian had grown up eating, that particular taste that was the flavor of being taken care of. And they talked about the garden and the neighbor's labradoodle, and a neighborhood development issue that had been causing friction on her mother's street for months. Before she left, her mother stood at the window again and looked at the city for a moment. "I wasn't happy about Damien in the beginning," she said. "When you first brought him home, I thought there was something, I couldn't name it. He always seemed to be explaining things. She shook her head. I convinced myself I was wrong, that I was being protective for the wrong reasons. Mom, Vivian said. I'm not saying I told you so, her mother said quickly. I'm saying I should have said something. She turned from the window. I'll say things earlier from now on. Vivian looked at her. This woman who'd worried quietly for 4 years and hadn't said, and who was now imperfectly and late trying to do better. Okay, she said. I'll listen more. Her mother hugged her at the door, held on a few seconds longer than usual. You seem different, she said when she pulled back. Different how? Her mother considered. More like yourself, she said. Whatever that means. After she left, Vivian stood in the apartment for a while. Then she picked up her phone and texted Landon. My mother just left. She said I seem more like myself. I've been thinking about what that means. His reply came 4 minutes later. Probably means you stopped performing a version of yourself you'd outgrown. She read it twice. Then, that's very accurate for a text message. His reply. I've been told I'm occasionally precise. Maya says hi. She smiled at her phone in the empty apartment. She put the phone down and went to the window, and the city was out there doing its thing. And she thought about her mother's words, and about the version of herself she'd been in for 4 years, and about what it felt like to have stopped. Then she went downstairs. Maya was working on a new page in the notebook. A bird, this time, seen from the park window, species as yet unidentified. She held it up when Vivian sat down. What do you think? Maya said. Vivian looked at the drawing, careful, earnest, the eye of the bird rendered with particular attention. The eye is very good, she said. Maya nodded seriously. Eyes are the hardest part. They are, Vivian agreed. For people too, Maya said, returning to her work. Vivian looked at the child. Landon, from the kitchen, glanced over with the expression he sometimes got when Maya said something that landed differently than expected. Yeah, Vivian said quietly. For people too. Outside, December was beginning to make its case. The temperature had dropped another few degrees, and the days were shorter now, the light going thin and pale by 3 in the afternoon. The city was putting up its holiday decorations, the strings of lights appearing on storefronts and above the streets, the particular transformation that happened every year, and still managed to change the feeling of being outside. She stayed for dinner that night. Landon made something with pasta, not the rigatoni, a different shape, with a sauce he'd been improving for 3 years according to his own account, and that was, objectively, very good. Maya set the table with the careful deployment of forks and napkins that she treated as a serious responsibility. They ate and talked, and nobody performed anything, and when Maya fell asleep mid-conversation about the bird's possible species, Landon carried her to bed without ceremony and came back and they finished the evening over the last of the wine. At 10:30, Vivian got her coat. Same time tomorrow? She said at the door. He looked at her. I have a recording session at 2, he said, but before that. Before that, she said. She took the elevator up. 2 floors. The same groaning, opinionated elevator she'd ridden down weeks ago in an evening gown with no clear plan, and then again in borrowed sweatpants, and then every time after that with a little less performance and a little more ease. She went to bed and slept well, which she'd been doing more reliably lately. Not because things were resolved, they weren't, fully, probably wouldn't be for a while, but because she'd stopped waiting for the resolution before allowing herself to rest. That was new. That was, she thought, the most useful thing she'd learned in a November that had started badly, and then, somehow, become something she'd remember. Not because it was perfect, because it wasn't. Because it was the first real thing she'd been part of in longer than she could honestly track, and she'd been paying attention to all of it, and none of it had asked her to be less than she was. She closed her eyes. 14 was a good floor. December came in without ceremony. One morning, the temperature dropped 10 degrees overnight and didn't come back up, and the city adjusted the way cities do. Heavier coats, faster walks, the collective resignation of people who'd been hoping for one more mild week and had finally accepted that it wasn't coming. The holiday lights that had been appearing on storefronts since late November were fully committed now, and at night the streets had that particular quality of cold bright that made everything look slightly more significant than it was. Vivian noticed it from the 16th floor and from the 14th floor, which was where she spent enough of her evenings that the view from Landon's window had become as familiar as her own. She noticed it from the park on Saturday mornings, walking behind Maya while Maya cataloged the winter-specific findings in her notebook. The way ice formed at the edge of puddles, a crow with an unusual white feather in its wing, the geometric precision of bare branches against gray sky. She noticed it from the Thai restaurant on the corner, where she and Landon had finally gone on a Tuesday evening after months of debating whether the Yelp reviews were earned and where the food had turned out to be genuinely good, which settled nothing because they'd both suspected different outcomes and were both, in different ways, satisfied. She noticed things more, in general. That was the residue of the last 2 months, a heightened attention to ordinary detail that she'd always had in professional contexts and had somehow let atrophy in her personal life. She noticed the specific sound of the building's elevator arriving at 14. She noticed the way Landon held his coffee mug, always with both hands in cold weather, one hand in warm. She noticed the precise angle of Maya's concentration when she was drawing something she cared about, the way the child went completely still except for her hand, everything else suspended. She noticed that she had stopped waiting to feel ready for things. That was the change she couldn't have predicted and couldn't fully explain, except that she'd spent years being strategic about her own life and had confused strategy with safety, and she didn't do that anymore. The dinner at the Italian place on Birchwood had been 3 weeks ago. Landon's mother had gone home Sunday morning with a bag of Maya's drawings and a promise to return for the holidays, and she'd hugged Vivian at the elevator with the unselfconscious warmth of a woman who'd decided something and saw no reason to be subtle about it. "You're good for him," she'd said, and then stepped into the elevator before Vivian could respond, which was probably deliberate. After the dinner, things had shifted in the way that things shifted when you stopped being careful about naming them. Nothing was declared. Nothing was announced. But the texture changed. He reached for her hand on the walk back from the park one Saturday, and she let him, and it wasn't a moment. It was just a thing that happened and continued happening. She stayed at his kitchen table past midnight sometimes, when Maya was asleep and the work was done, and there was no particular reason to leave except that she technically had a perfectly good apartment 2 floors up. He started texting her things during the day. Not much, not performatively, just small dispatches. A recording session that had gone unexpectedly well. A note Maya had written to Chester and left on the bookshelf. A question about the acquisition she'd mentioned, asked with the specificity of someone who'd been thinking about it after she'd left. She texted back. She found herself reaching for her phone in meetings with the specific anticipation of someone who had a person to hear from. That was new. The reaching for it instead of managing it. The acquisition closed the second week of December. The right price, 15% below the opening position, exactly as she'd told her CFO it would be. She'd gone into the final negotiation with something she could only describe afterward as clarity. Not aggression, not performance, just the flatline certainty of a person who knew what the number was and was content to wait until the other side arrived at it too. Her CFO had said, afterward, that she'd never seen Vivian quite that settled in a room. Vivian had said she'd been practicing. She'd called Landon from the car on the way back to the office, not to report, just to tell someone, the first person she thought of, the way you called the person your life was organized around. He'd said, "Told you." She'd said, "You didn't tell me anything, I told you." "You told me while I was asking you questions," he said. "That's basically the same thing." "It is absolutely not the same thing." "The important thing," he said, "is that the 15% thing worked." "The important thing," she said, "is that I was right." "Also true," he said. And she could hear in his voice, across a car phone, in traffic, on a Tuesday afternoon in December, the specific quality of someone who was genuinely pleased for you and had no agenda about it. She sat with that for the rest of the drive. The simple fact of it, how different it felt from being congratulated by people who were invested in her success as a reflection of themselves. The problem with Damien surfaced the second week of December, not dramatically, but in the way that unfinished things tended to surface, through a third party, at the wrong moment, with the particular texture of something that had been managed in the background without her knowledge. Her board vice chair, a deliberate man named Arthur Hensley, who'd been on her board since the company's third year and who she trusted more than most people in her professional life, asked her to coffee on a Thursday. Just coffee, informal, nothing on the agenda, which was Arthur's way of having a conversation he didn't want documented. He told her over black coffee in the cafe 2 blocks from her office that Damian Cross had been making calls. Not to the board directly. Subtler than that, to people adjacent to the board, to investors in Vivian's network who also moved in Damian's social orbit, to a few colleagues who sat on other boards. He'd been characterizing the end of the engagement in a way that raised questions about Vivian's stability and judgment. Nothing libelous, nothing that could be addressed directly. Just the accumulated drip of a well-placed narrative that she'd made an impulsive decision, that she'd been erratic, that there were concerns among those close to her about her personal situation and whether it was affecting her focus. Arthur said it the way he said hard things, straight, without softening, because he respected her enough not to. She sat with it for a moment. "How wide?" she said. "Limited," he said. "I've heard it from 2 sources, both of whom told me because they were skeptical of it, but it's moving." "How long has this been going on?" 2 weeks, maybe 3, he said. "I should have told you sooner. I wanted to understand the scope first." She looked at her coffee. She thought about Damian in her apartment on the morning after the engagement dinner, making himself coffee, already calibrating. She thought about the way he'd framed her time at Landon's apartment as a perception problem, his version of concern arriving pre-packaged as management. She thought about his mother's calls, and the mutual friends who'd drifted, and the quiet ongoing machinery of a man who was very good at controlling information around him. "He's good at it," she said. "He is," Arthur said. "It's sophisticated, no fingerprints." "What do you recommend?" "Nothing reactive," he said. "You respond through action, not statement. The Connecticut deal closing is the answer to every question he's raised. Performance speaks. You've had a strong quarter despite the personal disruption. Let the numbers talk." She nodded. "And the people he's talked to?" "I'll handle the ones I can reach," Arthur said. Quietly, "You have more allies than you think. Most people who've worked with you directly aren't susceptible to this." He paused. "Is there anything in your personal situation I should know about? Anything that could be used?" She thought about Landon's apartment, the kitchen table, the kettle, a 6-year-old's notebook full of drawings, a phone call from a car in traffic that she'd made because he was the first person she thought of. "No," she said. "There's nothing." Arthur nodded. "Good," he said. And then, because he was Arthur, "I'm sorry he's doing this." "Don't be," she said. "It tells me I made the right call." She didn't tell Landon about it that evening, at first. She came downstairs at 6 and sat at the table, and she was quieter than usual, and he always noticed, which was still something she was getting used to. But he didn't push. He made dinner, something simple, pasta with the sauce he'd been perfecting for 3 years, and Maya talked enough for all of them about a science project she was planning and whether frozen water was technically still water or a different thing. "It's the same water," Landon said, "different state." "But it acts different," Maya said. "Things act different under different conditions," he said. "Doesn't make them different things." Maya considered this with her fork in the air. "Like how I'm different at school than at home, but I'm still me." "Exactly like that," he said. Maya seemed satisfied and returned to her pasta. Vivian looked at him across the table, and he looked back, and in that look she told him silently that something had happened today, and he acknowledged silently that he'd noticed and would wait. And that was a kind of conversation she hadn't known she was capable of having with another person until she was having it. After Maya was asleep, she told him. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Are you angry?" he said. "Yes," she said, not surprised. "Angry." "Good," he said. She looked at him. "Good?" "Angry is accurate," he said. "Surprised would mean you'd missed something about him. You didn't miss anything. You just hoped it wouldn't be true." She exhaled. Arthur says respond through performance. Don't engage directly. Arthur sounds right, he said. He usually is, she said. She turned her mug on the table. Damien knows there's nothing to find. He's not going to find anything. He's trying to make the story about my judgment because that's the only play he has left. Let him, Landon said. People who've worked with you know what your judgment looks like. Some of them. The ones that matter, he said. She looked at him. There was something she needed to say, and she'd been building toward it for weeks, maybe longer, and Damien's maneuvering had clarified it rather than complicated it, the way that external pressure sometimes did. Strips away the peripheral and leaves you with the actual question. I want to say something, she said. Okay, he said. About what Arthur asked me, she said. Whether there was anything in my personal situation that could be used. She looked at her mug. I said no. I heard, he said. Because there isn't, she said. What's here? She gestured, vaguely, at the kitchen around them, at the two of them at the table, at the apartment that had become the center of something she hadn't planned. It's not a liability. It's not a secret. It's not something I'm managing or hiding or embarrassed by. She met his eyes. It's a person I chose. It's the clearest thing I've done in years. He was very still. I know we haven't put a name to it, she said. I know we've been careful, and I understand why, and I think the carefulness was right. But I want you to know, I'm not 2 floors up from something I'm uncertain about. I'm 2 floors up from somewhere I want to be. The kitchen was quiet. December outside, the city's muffled nighttime sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the small, ordinary constancy of an apartment where someone lived. Landon looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said. I've known for a while. Then why haven't you said anything? Because I was waiting for Damien to stop being a variable, he said. Not because I doubted you. Because I wanted it to be just us when we said it. He paused. I think it's just us now. She looked at him. It's just us now, she said. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not dramatically, not the way people did it in films when they wanted the audience to feel something. Just placed his hand over hers on the kitchen table. And she turned her hand over and held on, and that was that. No announcement, no performance. Just 2 people who'd arrived at the same place by completely different routes and had decided, without much ceremony, to stay. Damien's going to keep doing what he's doing for a while, Landon said. Probably. Probably, she said. Does that change anything? No, she said. The numbers will speak. Arthur's right about that. She paused. And honestly, I've been thinking about what it cost me to protect his reputation for 4 years. The things I didn't say, the moments I didn't push back because it would have been inconvenient for the way he needed things to look. She shook her head. I don't owe him that anymore. I'm done managing the narrative around him. Good, he said. He'll probably be fine, she said. He's a capable person with family money and good connections and a talent for reframing. He'll land on something. He'll tell himself a version of this where he was the one who let her go. She said it without bitterness. That's fine. I don't need the accurate version to win. You don't, he said. She looked at their hands on the table. I just need my version to be true, she said. And it is. He squeezed her hand once. She squeezed back. They stayed at the table until nearly midnight, talking about other things. The podcast, which was now 7 episodes in and had attracted the attention of a public radio station interested in carrying it, Maya's school play, in which she had been cast as a narrator and was taking the responsibility with the seriousness of someone preparing for the Supreme Court. The Connecticut acquisition and what came after it, an expansion she was beginning to think about that would take Sterling Meridian into a new vertical she'd been circling for 2 years. He asked good questions about the expansion. He had a way of asking questions about her work that wasn't about the business exactly, but about what she wanted from it, what it would mean if it worked, what it would cost if it didn't, whether this was a must-have or a want-to-have. She answered him honestly every time. She found, every time, that the honest answer was more accurate than the strategic one, and that the two were sometimes the same thing, and that knowing the difference mattered enormously. This was what she hadn't had. Not a person who understood her industry or could add value to her board or complement her public profile. A person who asked what she wanted and waited for the real answer. It seemed like a small thing. It was not a small thing. Christmas arrived the way it did, suddenly, somehow, despite being on the calendar the entire time. Landon's mother drove up on the 23rd and occupied the couch with the ease of a woman who'd done it before. And she and Maya immediately disappeared into a project involving the construction of a gingerbread structure that Landon's mother called a house, and Maya insisted was a laboratory for Chester, who had apparently developed an interest in science. Vivian went to Connecticut on the 24th. She'd made the plan weeks before, 3 days with her mother, real time, not the managed visit version she'd been doing for years. She drove up herself rather than being driven, which her mother registered with a small surprised look and then accepted, and they cooked together and watched old films on the couch with her mother's cat between them, and walked in the cold on the 25th morning through the neighborhood her mother had lived in for 30 years, past houses Vivian had walked past 100 times as a child. Her mother asked about Landon on the second day, not in the anxious, probing way of someone managing the situation, just asked direct, over coffee at the kitchen table. "Tell me about him," she said. Vivian thought about what to say and chose accuracy. She told her about the elevator and the midnight knock and the couch and the terrible chamomile tea and the kettle and the kitchen table and the way he'd asked her questions until she could hear herself think clearly. She told her about Maya, the notebook, the fox named Chester, the pigtails that were always asymmetrical, and the 6-year-old certainty with which Maya engaged the world. Her mother listened to all of it. When Vivian finished, her mother wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the kitchen window. "He sounds like a quiet person," her mother said. "He is," Vivian said. "You've always needed someone quiet," her mother said. "You make enough noise for 2 people on your own. You don't need an echo. You need someone who can hear you through all of it." Vivian looked at her. "You never said that before." "I know," her mother said. "I'm saying things earlier now." We agreed. On the drive back on the 26th, Vivian called Landon. He answered on the second ring. She could hear in the background the specific controlled chaos of his apartment with his mother and Maya both in it. A dispute about something, cheerful, everyone talking at once. "Good trip?" he said. "Good trip," she said. "Really good." She paused. "My mother says hi." "Your mother doesn't know me," he said. "She knows enough," she said. "She says you sound quiet." A beat. "Is that good?" From her, "Yes," Vivian said. "Absolutely yes." She heard him exhale, almost a laugh, not quite. "Drive safe," he said. "I will," she said. "I'll be there tonight." She drove through the afternoon with the radio on low and the winter light flat and white across the highway, and she thought about the year that was ending. Not with the evaluative overview she usually performed, the mental accounting of wins and losses, the strategic positioning for the year ahead. She thought about it differently this time, about what had changed in her, about who she'd been in January and who she was now, in December, driving back toward a building on the edge of the Midtown corridor where a man on the 14th floor would open the door when she knocked. She'd spent years being precise about outcomes. She'd been less precise about herself, about what she actually needed versus what she'd decided was reasonable to expect. The gap between those two things had widened slowly enough that she hadn't noticed until she was standing in a stranger's apartment in an evening gown at midnight, holding a glass of water with both hands, finally unable to pretend the gap wasn't there. She understood now that this was a common kind of blindness, the blindness of people who were competent at their lives, who managed everything well enough that the things they were managing poorly stayed hidden under the things they were managing well. You could sustain it for years. The company was growing. The apartment was beautiful. The relationship was stable, which she'd confused with good. She'd been stable. She'd been consistent. She'd been, in the fullest sense of the word, managed. The thing about real attention, genuine, interested, unhurried attention, was that it couldn't be managed. It just landed, or it didn't. And when it landed after years of the other thing, you felt it so clearly that it almost knocked you down. She was not knocked down. She was, for the first time in a long time, fully upright. She got back to the city at 5:30. She drove into the parking garage, pulled into her spot, sat in the car for a moment in the particular silence of a concrete structure. Then she got her bag and went to the elevator. She pressed 14. The doors opened on his floor, and she walked down the hallway and knocked. 3 times, same as always, same as the very first time, though everything about it was different now. She had her bag. She had her car keys and her winter coat and the slightly wind-burned quality of a person who'd been driving for hours. She had 3 days of her mother's cooking in her system and a phone conversation she was still turning over and the particular lightness of having said true things to a person who deserved to hear them. Landon opened the door. He looked at her. She looked at him. They'd been doing this for 2 months, and it still had a specific quality that she'd stopped trying to reduce to something more efficient. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. He stepped back. She came in. His mother was on the couch reading something and raised a hand in greeting without looking up, which was the greeting of a woman who'd decided Vivian was household now and could be treated accordingly. Maya shot out of her room in socks and pajama pants, holding Chester, and said, "Chester learned 2 new things while you were gone," and began immediately explaining what they were. And Landon took Vivian's bag from her shoulder and put it by the door, and the apartment was warm and lit against the December dark outside. And somebody had been cooking something that smelled like garlic and herbs, and a long time on low heat. Vivian stood in the middle of it. The noise, the warmth, the easy accumulation of people who were comfortable with each other in a space. And she felt it the way she'd been feeling ordinary things more acutely lately. Not as a peak moment, not as something to be captured or documented or made into a version of itself, just as itself, exactly. This was what she'd been building without knowing it. Not a life that looked right from the outside, a life that felt right from the inside. The distinction was enormous, and she'd only recently learned to tell the difference. They ate dinner at the table, all 4 of them, Landon's mother dominating the conversation with a story about her neighbor's labradoodle. Apparently Biscuit had achieved some kind of neighborhood notoriety. And Maya asking forensic follow-up questions, and Landon and Vivian exchanging looks across the table with the comfortable shorthand of 2 people who'd been paying attention to each other long enough to have a language in it. After dinner, Maya went to bed with minimal negotiation, a minor Christmas miracle that Landon's mother took quiet credit for. His mother went to bed shortly after, declaring that people who drove long distances in December deserved rest and that she was people. The apartment went quiet. Vivian and Landon sat at the kitchen table with tea, properly made, exactly right, the way it had been for weeks now, and the December night outside the window, and the specific silence of an apartment after a full evening of people. "Good Christmas?" he said. "Good Christmas," she said. "Really good." She turned the mug in her hands. "She asked about you." "Your mother." "She said you sound quiet." She smiled. She meant it as a compliment. She said I make enough noise for 2 and I need someone who can hear me through it. He looked at her. "She's right," he said. "I know," Vivian said. "I told her she was right. She seemed pleased with herself." "She should be," he said. Vivian looked at him across the table. This man who'd opened a door at midnight and made terrible tea and bought a kettle and asked questions until she could hear herself think. Who'd held the space while she figured out what she was leaving and what she was going toward and what the difference was? Who raised a child alone with the steady, unremarkable devotion of someone who'd decided it was the most important thing he'd ever do and had not wavered from that? Who told her he wanted any future version of things to be a clear choice, and then waited, without pressure, while she got there? "I want to say something," she said. "You've been saying that a lot lately," he said. "I notice." "I have things to say," she said. "I spent a long time not saying them. I'm making up ground." "Fair enough," he said. She looked at her mug, then at him. "I know what this is now," she said. "I've known for a while. I think you've known for longer than I have." She met his eyes. "I'm not running from anything. I'm not filling space. I'm not in the relief phase of something that hurt." She paused. "I'm here because you are the clearest thing in my life right now, and I want to keep building toward that." He looked at her steadily. "Yeah," he said. "Same." "That's it?" she said. "Same? What do you want me to say?" "Something with slightly more words." He almost smiled. The almost smile she'd come to understand better than she understood most things. He turned his mug on the table, the small rotation, the extra beat of accuracy. And then he said, I keep thinking about the night you knocked on the door, how I looked through the peephole and saw you there in that dress. And I thought, I don't know what's happening here, but I'm going to find out. He paused. And every time after that, I thought the same thing. I'm going to find out. Not push it, not rush it, just see what this actually is. He looked at her. I think I found out. What did you find out? She said. That I don't want the door to be just a door anymore, he said. I want it to be the door you come through. When you're tired, when you've had a hard day, when you've closed an acquisition, when you've just talked to your mother, I want it to be where you go. She was quiet for a moment. That's more than same, she said. Yeah, he said. I guess it is. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, the same gesture he'd made 3 weeks ago, returned, both of them knowing what it meant now in a way that didn't need explanation. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Outside, December was doing what it did. The city with its lights, its traffic, its ongoing indifferent hum. The building quiet around them, his mother asleep on the couch, Maya asleep with Chester on the bookshelf next to the horse books, the notebook of found things on the coffee table, the pages filled now with months of a child's careful attention to the world. This was the thing nobody told you about starting over. Not the drama of the ending. She'd expected the drama, had braced for it, had handled it. But the quiet accumulation of the after, the way a new life didn't announce itself. It just showed up, small piece by small piece, in kettles and conference shirts and tea steeped correctly, and a child who named things with total confidence, and a man who asked what you wanted and meant it. You didn't plan it. You just paid attention and kept showing up and let it become what it was. She had done that. Finally, after a long time of doing almost everything else, she had done that. She stayed until 1. When she finally got up, he walked her to the door the way he always did. Not because she needed walking, just because it was the kind of person he was, the small, consistent courtesies of a person whose character was located in the details. At the door, she turned back. Same time tomorrow? She said. I have a recording at 2, he said. Before that, she said. Before that, he said. She took the elevator up 2 floors, stood in her apartment with her coat still on for a moment, looking at the view she'd chosen for its beauty and its clarity. The city spread below her exactly as she'd arranged it. It was still beautiful. It just wasn't where everything was anymore. She thought about what her mother had said on the phone after she described the whole improbable sequence, the midnight knock, the terrible tea, the fox named Chester, the man who waited. Her mother had listened to all of it and then said quietly, I think you've been learning the difference between being chosen because you're valuable and being chosen because someone actually sees you. Those are very different things, Vivian. She'd sat in the car on the highway with that. She sat with it now. She had been chosen for 4 years because she was an asset, because the version of her that Damien had assembled in his mind was useful and beautiful and reflected well on him, and as long as she remained within that version, she was valued. The moment she exceeded it was more complicated, more tired, more human than the asset required. She became a problem to manage. She'd learned to manage herself before he had to. She'd made herself smaller in increments so gradual she'd thought she was just being reasonable. She knew the cost of that now, not just what it had done to her relationship, but what it had done to her. The slow narrowing of what she allowed herself to want, to say, to need. The strategic competence applied inward as a form of suppression. The list with 2 columns, one of which she'd been refusing to read for years. She was reading it now. All of it. There was a specific kind of courage required to be known by another person. Not the courage of the boardroom, not the courage of the difficult negotiation or the hard decision or the public risk. Those kinds of courage she had in abundance. The other kind, the courage of letting someone see you tired and uncertain and wrong and insufficient and trusting that they won't use it, that kind was harder. That kind required a faith she'd been rationalizing her way around for years. She'd stopped rationalizing. She'd knocked on a door at midnight in an evening gown with nowhere to be, And on the other side of it had been a person who made her tea and let her sleep on his couch, and asked questions until she could hear herself. And she'd come back, and she'd kept coming back, and now it was December and the door was where she went. That was not a small thing. That was the main thing. She hung up her coat. She got ready for bed. She looked at her phone. No messages, which was fine, which was better than fine, and set it on the nightstand and turned off the light. 2 floors below, an apartment she knew as well as her own was quiet in the way of places where people were sleeping and would wake up in the morning and do ordinary things. Make coffee, pack a lunch, argue mildly about breakfast, find Chester relocated to a new position on the shelf by someone who had opinions about spatial arrangements. She would be there in the morning, before the recording at 2. She'd be there with her laptop and her work and her second cup of the Ethiopian coffee that she'd started buying 2 bags of, one for upstairs, one for 14. And she'd sit at the table that was her table now, in the apartment that was not her apartment but was, in every way that mattered, where she lived. She closed her eyes. It wasn't a perfect life. It was never going to be a perfect life. There would be hard quarters and board disputes, and Damien's narrative still trickling through the parts of her world she couldn't reach. And there would be days when being a functional adult was more than she had bandwidth for. And there would be things she and Landon would have to figure out that they hadn't encountered yet. Because that was the nature of building something real with another person who also had a life and a history and a child and a whole complicated inner existence that was not organized around her. She knew all of that. She was choosing it anyway. That was the difference between this and everything before it. She was choosing it with full information, eyes open, no illusions about what was being asked of her or what she was asking in return. Not because it was safe, not because it was strategic, not because it looked right from a certain angle, because it was true. Because she'd sat at a kitchen table in a modest apartment on the 14th floor of a building with a groaning elevator and done the math on her own life, and arrived at an honest answer, and the honest answer was here. She had knocked on a door and someone had opened it, and every day since she had come back. That was the whole of it, really. The whole of what she'd learned in a year that had started with a man who wasn't sure he wanted her, and ended with a man who was, quietly and completely, and without performance, sure. Being chosen felt different when it came from someone who saw you clearly and wanted you anyway. She had not known how different until she felt it. She knew now. She would not forget. She was exactly where she belonged.